All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to day 2 of DelDOT's 2021 Lessons Learned Workshop. Again, my name is John Cariano, and I'll be your host. We have another full agenda today. We anticipate going to noon. A couple reminders before we get started. If you're interested in PDHs, an evaluation form will be sent out after the workshop, and that'll be due by Friday. And we are going to be handling the questions in the Q&A feature again in Zoom, and also there's closed captioning available. So with that, we're going to move on to our first presenters.
Oh, I don't think you can. I think the salt's not sugar.
It's feedback. So our first presenters are from Bridge Design. Scott Walls and Nick Dean will be presenting on accelerated bridge construction.
All right, good morning. Thank you, John. Super happy to be here this morning. As John mentioned, I'm Scott Walls, project manager in the Bridge Design Group. I'm joined today with Nick Dean, also project manager in the Bridge Design Group. He's going to take over about halfway through. We're here today to talk about lessons learned with accelerated bridge construction. Nick and I have been super fortunate over the past few years to be involved in a number of ABC projects. We've really compiled a bank of information, and we're just going to touch on some of the highlights today. So as it's the first presentation of the morning, we thought we'd start off with a little reminder of the department's mission and vision, which is excellence in transportation for every trip, every mode, every dollar, and everyone. As we talk about ABC projects, I think you'll see how it really weaves into each one of these elements from our mission and vision. So let's take a quick throwback to just what exactly is ABC and accelerated bridge construction. So paraphrasing a little bit from FHWA, bridge construction that uses innovative planning, design, materials, and construction methods in a safe and cost-effective manner to reduce the on-site construction time. What's that look like in Delaware? Typically, it's through the use of precast and prefabricated elements. We do use some innovative materials such as ultra-high performance concrete. We've been using it for about the past 7 years. It's a really complex material. Nick's going to talk a little bit more about it, but we're absolutely still learning there. Quick spoiler alert, we do have some bridge slides coming to a neighborhood near you if you live in Sussex County or in Newcastle County. Those projects are underway currently. There'll be a first in Delaware, and that's super cool technology where we're literally going to build a new bridge adjacent to an existing bridge and over a short duration demo the old bridge and literally slide a new bridge into its place. So we're really, really excited about that opportunity. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, why ABC if you're going to close the road? That seems like a huge impact. Why not just stage construction, do some traffic phasing, that sort of stuff? And you know, that's a good point. That's an option that certainly can be achieved, but we found it to be more beneficial to just, in a sense, rip the Band-Aid off, go in with a full road closure, dedicate all our time and resources to replacing a bridge in a shorter time frame, and then returning conditions back to normal. It kind of comes down to safety, as Adam Weiser talked yesterday a little bit about traffic incidents in work zones. And he mentioned that it was a very low percentage, but any opportunity that we can take to reduce those number of incidents in work zones is always something that is to our benefit and something that we're going to try to achieve. And it comes down to a certain level of trust amongst everyone. Trust not only for the designers to come up with the idea, but the fabricators, the contractors, our construction staff to execute these contracts, and of course, trust from all the support sections that we can not only accomplish it, but get your feedback so that we're making informed decisions going into the project. All right, I mentioned precast and prefabricated systems. What is that again? Really, that's the fabrication of elements off-site, or really in an area that doesn't impact traffic. And what we're trying to do with that is just shift time away from the construction site. So if you look at the photo in the top right, that's a cast-in-place construction method where we're casting the deck in its final position. You can see all the formwork that's there, all that had to be installed. That sea of green is all the reinforcement. That's placed by hand. It's all different sizes, different spacing. It's got to be tied. It's got to be inspected. Then you've got the labor forces coming in with lots of concrete trucks, pump trucks. We're pouring concrete, we're finishing it, and then we're sitting there waiting for that to cure. And if we do that in a precast system, like you see on the bottom right, we do all of that same process, but just outside of traffic impacts. And so the photo on the bottom right is in a warehouse where precast abutments is being fabricated. Once it's fabricated, it's essentially like a Lego piece. We can bring that out to the site, and you might be asking yourself, so is it really that easy? Do we get to the end of the project design's complete, and we just slap the easy button and say, boom, let's make this an ABC project. Well, not quite, right? It takes a ton of effort, especially up front. First, we have to figure out, is this even realistic? And in a design bid build situation where we don't have a contractor on board, we're really making a lot of assumptions for that contractor. What kind of crane do they have? What kind of capabilities do they have? What are they going to choose to do? How are they going to set up? Are we proposing something that's realistic? And the lesson learned there is that that takes coordination with everyone. There's a lot of great experience throughout the department and with our consultants. And so we really need to rely on each other to get the best information up front in design so that when it gets to construction, it can be executed smoothly. It also takes a greater amount of detail in the plans. And the top right photo might be a little blurry for you, but you can probably tell just how much information is on there. That's because there's little room for error. We can't really fall back on the older adage of, they'll figure it out in the field, right? It's got to be figured out now so that when it's fabricated, it fits up properly. And Nick will talk about tolerances and fit up a little bit later. And you can see in the bottom right photo, that's that same precast pier cap that was shown in detail on the top. That pier cap is being slid down over those 3 columns. So if something happened in fabrication or design where those columns and those voids didn't line up, then we've got big trouble, right? And that comes back to trust. So our traffic group wouldn't be too happy with us if they agreed to a full closure and thought it was going to be 30 days, and then our pieces didn't fit up. There's always unforeseen challenges, and we've certainly learned that lesson, right? There will always be challenges that arise that we thought we figured everything out in design, but something popped up. And that's certainly what happened here. This is the 141 I-95 project. We experienced some different situations with our camber. A camber is the positive deflection that's built into these steel beams. When we got into fabrication, it turned out that the camber didn't behave quite like we thought it would. If you find yourselves designing any of these and you want to reach out to Nick and I, we'd love to talk about it further. But we'll keep it pretty brief today, and just say that the lesson learned here was certainly that no one was put sort of out to blame to start this project. We realized that there was a potential issue, and the team gathered together. We identified what the issue was, and we identified the solution. Never was there a time where someone said, "Hey, whose fault is this? Who's going to pay? You delayed me. This project's over." It was never any of that. It was just a simple sense of urgency. Let's get this job done, and let's do it with a quality product. So it truly is a lesson that was a success. And here's a couple final photos once we resolved all those camber deflection issues, and we're able to pick up these modules that were prefabricated and set them into place with night closures. So super successful story, great project to be a part of. So not only do we need to communicate, but we got to plan. We got to plan ahead. And as old Ben Frank said, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And that's almost what happened here. A little case study at Bridge 2-050A. We had the use of prefabricated abutments. So that's the top right photo that you see there. Those abutments were delivered to the site, but this placement, the excavation, wasn't quite ready yet. So the contractor elected to offload those materials and stage them on the roadway, with the idea that in a few days, the excavation would be ready, which is the photo in the bottom right. They would bring another trailer out, pick up these members, put them on the trailer, back them up to the excavation, then use another crane to place them. While picking it up from the location in the top right, unfortunately, the members fell, they were dropped, and caused some damage to the members, right? So you see some spalling occurring. There was cracking throughout the precast abutment, exposed rebar. And you might be saying, oh man, that's a lot of money, right? And that's true. It was $80,000 in those abutments. Fortunately, they were salvageable. We were able to repair the concrete. But that's really not the issue, right? It's not just the money. It's also that these are custom-made pieces specifically for this project, and we have a full road closure. So everyone trusted us to come into this situation with a road closure, and we were going to be in and out in 30 days. And so now what's our backup plan? It's not really easy to just have another piece made, right? Where we got to get back in line with the queue for the fabrication plant. There's all the formwork, curing, of course, a long time that could happen to get a new piece back here. So essentially, plan your moves out, right? This probably wouldn't have happened if we hadn't have had to have that intermittent staging occur. So in a sense, work smarter, not harder, or even in this case, do less. Same project, similar Same project, similar issue. We got the beams delivered just ahead of the time when our bearings were delivered. So we set them on temporary bearings, waiting for the new bearings to come in, and then had to make some shifts to move those beams into their final location. You can see that blue line on the bottom right is actually the end of the beam. So that whole bearing should be underneath that beam, but the slight delays of material delivery created not the most beneficial situation there for that project. Very similar issue here with Bridge 1-251. These are precast deck panels where we replaced the bridge deck with these prefabricated panels. Awesome project, ended up as a huge success, but similar story, right? Fabricator wasn't quite ready for the panels, or contractor wasn't quite ready for the panels, so the fabricator delivered them to the contractor's site, stacked them for storage. A few weeks later, the contractor was ready. He picked up all the panels again. He shipped them to the site. He dropped them off, unloaded them on the north side of the site. A couple days later, he realized he needed some panels on the south side of the site. So he picked up a bunch of panels, had to drive around the detour, place them on the south side of the site too. So a lot of picking and handling that just really didn't need to occur. Unfortunately, nothing dropped, nothing cracked. Our M&R group was great, monitoring the panels as they were stacked and loaded and unloaded. But again, we really opened up the door for a lot of opportunity there. So in a sense, it is means and methods to the contractor. You might be thinking that to yourself. But what we're encouraging you to do is, from our lessons learned, is open the conversation, just open the door, give out a positive presence, state how you think things could go, or just share your experiences. I think you'll see that those opinions will be positively returned. So with that, I'll pass it over to Nick Dean. Thank you.
All right, nice job, Scott. I'm going to start my presentation by apologizing if I go over. You can send all your complaints to Scott Walls. That's scott.walls@delaware.gov. So send them that way. So I also wanted to start off with a couple quick thank yous. I want to thank Bob and Danny for filtering in some crowd noise for me. It's a little different presenting in front of nobody. So, I like to feel like my jokes are going to land. So that crowd noise is kind of helping. I also want to thank Kevin Lindell. If you guys ever looked at the agenda, Kevin was supposed to be on this, but probably the first lesson we learned while preparing this presentation was that we can't count on Kevin Lindell. So there's that. But let me jump into the meat and potatoes of the presentation here. So let's talk about the ABCs of tolerances. With accelerated bridge construction, your construction tolerances become ever more important. They become tighter. Things, you're trying to minimize the size of your joints, minimize the size of your precast elements, and to do that, your tolerances need to get tighter. Like Scott said, the precast elements, you don't have as much play from a construction standpoint. With a cast in place member, you can, pour things a little differently than you normally would. But if everything's already precast, it's set, dimensions are set, and you have little to no wiggle room. So again, with the accelerated bridge construction, the idea is to create smaller joints and connections. The picture you can see here on the right is a picture of piles being driven on Bridge 1-438. And for this project, because the tolerances were being tightened from 3 inches to 2 inches, the contractor took extra time and extra care to create like a steel template to drive these piles. So they were like completely plumbed, totally on point. And you can see from the picture on the left that the void of the abutment fits directly over top of it. Now, if these piles were out of plumb, 3 inches in each direction, then this project becomes a disaster because you're going to have to scramble to find a fix. Now, with that, you can also see these joints. These are precast adjacent box beams. You can see on the picture on the right how small that joint is and how you're dealing with, we call it a non-contact lap splice. So there's literally hundreds of bars between each beam that you're wrestling against. So that's another factor to consider during construction and design when you're factoring in constructability. The picture on the left is actually a look at the modular girders that we did for 676 and 677. Similar detail, your joint is only about 6 inches wide. And again, you're dealing with, hundreds and hundreds of rows of bars. So it becomes a bear to deal with. And that places a lot of extra strain on the precaster and the crane operator and, the contractor when he's trying to set these things. So these are all factors that come into play. All right, one of the other big things with tolerance, and this is probably our most major issue, is differential camber. This is a major issue with superstructure elements, so next beams, adjacent box beams, the modular girders that Scott mentioned. And it really requires additional attention during the camber design. Scott and I learned a great deal in 676 and 677 about how the steel and the concrete of those members were going to interact and how things were cambering a little differently than what we expected. So that's something that we really needed to consider. And ultimately what we found as the best approach is to use like a series of grinding and an overlay as a buffer to kind of make up for any indiscrepancies between the different members and kind of achieve your design roadway profile. All right, so now we'll dive into a few case studies, and we're going to focus mostly on the precast deck panels for this one. So this is a couple of examples where tolerance has become an issue. It's reared its ugly head. And that was 1-717 on I-95, which was our first precast deck panel job. Bridge 1-680 on SR 141 and 1-251 on Harmony Road. Now, all of these panels were precast and they had a proposed thickness of 8 3/4 of an inch with a 1/4 inch of sacrificial grind. And that grind is really designed so that, you can make up for any, differences in thickness or anything like that. And the tolerance was designed to be plus or minus a 1/4 inch. So it could be a 1/4 inch high or a 1/4 inch low. In actuality, what happened with the fabricated panels was from end to end, so from one end of a panel to the other end of the same panel, what we were seeing was 8 3/4 at one end on some and 9.5 at the other. So the panels themselves weren't cast 100% level. From panel to panel, we were seeing about an inch of difference. So there was an offset from adjacent panel to adjacent panel, and you can see in the top picture how that issue can compound on itself when you're dealing with dozens of panels. If you're dealing with a few members, it's something that can pretty easily be dealt with, but it becomes a bear when you're dealing with that many elements. And in talking with Kevin, he estimated that between 717's panels and 680's panels, that about 80% of them were out of our construction tolerance. Now, I mean, SR 141 and I-95 are, heavily traveled roads. So, you get something that's out of tolerance that bad, we can't just reject them. So it's not one of those scenarios where we can go back to the contractor or the fabricator and say, you have to recast all these, because we have the road closed at the time and everything is, moving quickly. We're trying to get out of everyone's way. So it was a pretty good job on our side and our construction side to handle these issues as they came up. But with this, we'll talk about how this happened. So the big question is, how are these panels so different from one panel to another when the thicknesses are supposed to be the same? And, how are they so different from end to end? And the answer is we honestly didn't have an answer. We feel like the design was sound. And, in talking with Kevin, we feel like, the inspection side did their due diligence on inspecting, making sure the formwork was adequate and everything. But ultimately, some of the unknowns kind of lie on fabrication and the fabricator. And so some of the questions we posed were, could the formworks have warped? With it being a flat panel, you would assume, you could pour it flat on the ground, but, was the deck panel cast on an unlevel surface? These are questions that, we need to ask, and we don't really have a positive answer on that. But the effect of this, and it happens fairly regularly, is that it makes the UHPC formwork a lot more difficult to do between the joints. So all those joints, all the plywood you see, those are UHPC joints, and it makes the fit up a lot harder for your formwork because you're trying to nail down a piece of plywood to two uneven surfaces, and it's hard to get that seal. So you're more prone to leaking. You got to take extra time to do your formwork to ensure that it's sealing properly. It's not just lay it down flat and nail it down, because at that point you're dealing with a little different of a bear. And one of the things we saw on 1-680 was when the contractor went to pour the UHPC, he actually ground that joint straight across, and it created this vertical face at the edge of the joint, and that created this shear interface, and it caused reflective cracking up through our PPC. And you can see that here. It's not the best picture, but there's cracking all along this deck, and it really follows the length of the panels here. So you can see every edge of the UHPC joint if you go out there and look at it. So our solutions to these, we're still obviously trying to improve every day on this, getting better at, fabrication stuff, putting a little more onus on the fabricator and making sure they're doing their due diligence. But on our end, what we like to do is we use overlays to kind of make up the difference a lot of times. We also grind down these edges now. We've learned that, grinding those UHPC joints, you can't grind them flat. You got to kind of taper these grinds so that you don't get that reflective cracking. And then in talking with other DOTs, Scott mentioned how important communication is. We've been talking to New York DOT, and they're one of the leaders in UHPC. They've started actually casting about an inch of additional thickness into their precast elements so that they can just grind it down and make up for any differential camber between beams or any sort of ambiguity between precast panels. So that's something we haven't tried to date, but it's definitely something I think we'll be looking into just to give ourselves a little more leeway with the ABC construction. So this is just a photo of a PPC overlay getting laid down over the deck panels to kind of overcome that difference in thicknesses. So now I'll talk to you about ultra high performance concrete. Ultra high performance concrete is really the glue that's holding all of our precast together now. It's taken what used to be a weakness in our bridges, where joints were prone to leak, and it's turned it into a strength. It's actually now typically the strongest part of our bridge. We don't really see any leaks through these joints anymore as long as they're installed correctly. And the other thing UHPC allows for is smaller joints. You have shorter development lengths, so you don't have to space the elements out as far to account for your bars. It's a pretty versatile material. It's new construction. You can do new construction with it. You can do rehabilitations. It's great for connections. We've done overlays with it. And next, what I'd like to see is Delaware try a UHPC precast member. Hint, hint, wink, wink, correct. So there is no I in UHPC. The big thing with this being a new material is we have to put our ego aside. We've seen projects go, polar opposites just based on the attitude of the contractor. We've had contractors act like, they've been doing this for years. They understand concrete, which they probably do, but this UHPC is not normal concrete. So they need to throw all their, preconceived notions about how the material works aside and, trust people that have actually done it, lean on the professionals. Because this concrete is actually about 5 times stronger than normal concrete. It doesn't have aggregate like traditional concrete. Instead, it uses steel fibers, and it's also flowable. You can see the bottom picture shows a field test where the UHPC just spreads out, and the top picture shows traditional concrete, and that's like a slump test. You can see the difference between the materials. So I mentioned utilizing the experience of others. We've leaned heavily on FHWA and other state DOTs. We lean hard on our M&R sections. They're a valuable resource for us. There are members in bridge design that have a lot of experience with this, and our construction guys, they've gained a lot of experience too. So these are all resources that we should rely on. So planning, Scott mentioned how important planning is, and Bob's holding up a sign that I need to get going here, so I'm going to try to speed this up. So planning is key for UHPC here. We've been continuously developing our specifications. It's not something that we've written and just we're done with. We haven't even made it actually a standard yet because the specifications seem to be changing based on what we're finding, what other DOTs are finding, what FHWA is finding. So it's an ever-evolving process, and we've actually kind of moved back and forth between prescriptive and non-prescriptive specs. And basically that means, we don't want to dictate to the contractor how they're doing things. But with this material being so new, it's hard to just, give them like tests to hit. So it actually helps to be a little more prescriptive in this instance. So again, during the development of our specifications, we've had input from multiple parties, other DOTs, FHWA, fabricators, all that. So the other big thing to making UHPC a success is to have a UHPC floor plan. These are submitted by the contractor and need to be approved by the engineer. And the idea here is basically to vet out any problems and, bring it to the contractor's attention that this is not your normal concrete. It needs to be treated differently. And there are, potential pitfalls with it. Another thing we like to do is have a pre-pour meeting with the contractor. We bring the designers, the inspectors, DelDOT Construction, and the contractor all together to walk through the pre-pour plan. Again, this is kind of your final walkthrough to vet out any potential issues that may have slipped through with the pre-plan. You go over your formwork and your pouring sequence and all that kind of stuff. So with this, the UHPC pour, really the success of it depends on the contractor as well. He or she needs to make sure that they have adequate personnel to mix, transport, top form, because this process moves pretty quickly. They need to know how many mixers they're going to have. Inevitably, one has failed on every single job we've done, so it's good to have two. You got to have, you got to be able to time your alternating mixers. If you're using two mixers at once, you got to alternate them so that you're not, leaving a lot of downtime. You got to figure out where you're going to stage your mixers. Are you going to stage one on either side of the bridge? Are you going to transport it all the way across the bridge? We ran into that on 676, 677, and I think it slowed the contractor down doing that. The pouring sequence, they have to figure out bulkhead locations, MOT while you're pouring over traffic, and then pour techniques. You can see here the different technique. There's a trough here that the contractor is using. There's also buckets that can be used so that, different applications call for different methods to be used. So with that, I probably the most important thing to making UHPC a success is the formwork. And I always tell one of our designers this when he's moving too fast: slow equals smooth and smooth equals fast. If you take the time to ensure your formwork is sound, it's ultimately going to save you time and money. You've got to build in bulkheads to limit losses in the event of leaks. And just to put that in perspective, losing one large batch of UHPC it's about equal to an hour of time lost just in mixing and stuff. That doesn't include like repairing the joint and cleaning up the UHPC spill. It also equates to about $6,600 in wasted material. So that's material that's just out the door. All right, and these are just some of our successful techniques that we've seen. This contractor basically, used an anchor system to tighten the formwork up. We've seen mastic get used in between adjacent box beams. So there are a lot of different techniques out there. All right, so in summary, I hit on this before, Kevin Lindell cannot be counted on. So that's lesson learned number one. The other thing is to change the mindset when it comes to ABC. We can't always just rely on what we've always done because, it may work, but, things can be done better. So while we are looking to accelerate construction time, we cannot cut corners. So that means, the contractor's moving fast, but they have to hit our specs. They still have to abide by our environmental restrictions. If they're going to work overnight and, extended hours, they may need noise ordinances and noise surveys. And, learn from others' mistakes. You can avoid your own mistakes by learning from what others have done. So we lean on a lot of different entities and different people. And then communication and planning are the keys to success with accelerated bridge construction. And I'm wrapping up, but I did want to point out, I did want to thank a couple people. So a lot of our accelerated bridge construction on the precast side, Bob Norwood has been a huge asset for us. I know he just retired, so he's not even hearing this, but I thought people should know he was a huge asset for us and a huge reason why a lot of these precast elements have been successful. And then in the top right, you see a picture of my buddy Herb Monsalud, who I'm pretty sure doesn't sleep, but maybe about 2 hours a night. On 676, 677, he is always out on this job, always making sure the contractor's doing the right thing. And that's really what it takes is, having people that are going to make sure we're doing the right things and things are going to plan. So big thanks to those two guys. So thank you guys.
Thank you very much, Scott and Nick. If you have any further questions for them, please reach out to them via email. But we're going to move on to John Karam, sticking in the bridge design group. He's going to be talking about spray applied pipeliners.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jonathan Karam. I'm a project manager in bridge design. I've been with the department for about 7 years now. And today I'm going to talk about lessons learned on spray applied pipelining. So I'll give a quick intro to SAPL. So spray applied pipelining involves the use of fiber reinforced mortar designed for structural rehabilitation of culverts. There's no digging required. It's a cost-effective solution. It's frequently used for sinkhole projects, drainage pipes, and it can be a hand-applied spin cast. We get a design life of hopefully 75 years. I don't think it's going to be close to that. Maybe 50 to 75 would be good, or until I retire. And it's a trenchless alternative to CIPP and slip lining. So when to use SAPL? So it's a good tool to rehab single access bridges. If you have utility conflicts on a project, traffic, MOT issues, issues with the detour, cost factors, a lot of horizontal, vertical constraints. And also if you have staging, LOC, or right-of-way restrictions, that makes it a good candidate for this. And so some highlighted past projects that I'm going to go through. Bridge 1-238, which utilized Storm Seal. Bridge 1-657, which utilized Geospray, which is a geopolymer. And then Bridge 1-227, which used Centripipe. So Bridge 1-238 is located in Newark on Elizabeth Court. It's a cul-de-sac. So there's two 6'9" by 4'11" CMPs at 110 feet each. And like I said, it's a single access bridge. There was a lot of utility issues, which you'll see on the next slide. The replacement cost for something like this would be pretty staggering. And there's limited room for staging and no detour due to being a single access bridge. So here's a plan view. There is 3 underground cable lines that cross the pipe twice, underground electric line that crosses the pipe twice, and an underground sewer and underground water line. So with a bridge like this, I would say it's irreplaceable based on all these factors. There's no way to really maintain access to the homeowners while staging construction to do a full replacement on something like this. So we had the contractor go out there and they did the first shot. This was the first spray lining we had done. After their first go ahead, they said, "Oh, we're good to go. We're happy with it." So the photo on the left, as you can see, there's infiltration, there's cracks, there's, water, there was water coming through, rust staining. We were not happy with it. And on the photo on the right, we made them come back, do a relining, they filled in the corrugations, had to do some soil injection. So still not perfect, but getting there and getting to a better product that, at least we can accept and have something that we have a little bit more confidence in than, something that's dripping water. So here's a quick little before and after. As you can see, the bare CMP on the left, there was a lot of rust from the water line down. It wasn't really in great shape. And then the after photo, it's, not 100% like a new CMP, or a new RCP, but it is getting close. And, we were, okay and happy with the result in the end. And, hopefully we get the 50 to 75 years out of this. So the next one I'm going to talk about is 1-657. This is at the US 13 and 40 split in Newcastle. If anyone's familiar with that area, there's a lot of businesses, a lot of pedestrian traffic, a lot of traffic in general. So with this project, we had a lot of underground aerial utilities. There was a gas station like right next to the project. Like I said, a lot of businesses, and based on the design criteria for a project like this, I don't think it actually met the the standards for horizontal and vertical curves. So that's another thing. If we would have to raise this road, there was only about a foot of cover on top of that pipe. So if you wanted to put a larger structure in, then you're going to have to raise that road, and it would be quite a problem. Also, railroad involvement. And extensive MOT if we were to replace this with, estimated replacement costs could exceed 10 million, maybe more. And on this next slide, you'll kind of see this area. So there's the bridge in the middle with the two red pipes. You got Route 40 and 13. So I'd call this a nightmare project. I have nightmare of Route 40 and 13. I think that's fitting. Buried gas line, railroad, and there's even like unknown drainage pipes that kind of feed into this bridge. So hydraulically, it's, you may have to chase those pipes all the way back to actually replace it properly. So we ended up doing the pipeliner here, and it worked out. We were, quite happy with it. You don't have to close down traffic. There was no impact to that. It was just some staging on the right-hand side of the shoulder and a little grass area. So they set that up. The work took maybe 2-3 weeks, and we were in and out of there. So compared to a replacement in an area like this, even with ABC, like Nick and Scott touched on, I don't know what a feasible way to approach this project would be. And anyone that's familiar with scoping and, general ideas of replacing a bridge or even, a road like this, I think they would understand the constraints as well. So here's a couple construction photos. There's a guy on the left, he's just going through, lining it, cleaning it. And then on the right, you can kind of see how we have that footprint. It's, just that box truck. They have all their equipment in there. They pull their pump, their hoses, and they go right into the pipe. And they have a small little stream diversion in there, nothing too crazy. And here's a before and after. As you can see, the before was pretty bad just from a debris standpoint. So we spent a lot of time cleaning that out. But at the end, we did get a good product, and this was with the geopolymer. So we didn't see any cracking, any infiltration. Quite happy with this. And I can move on to the last one. Bridge 1-227. This is on Paper Mill Road in Newark. And this was actually Bryce's project. It was a CMGC. So that kind of helped out by being able to work with the contractor a little bit more ahead of time before actually going to construction, especially with, pipelining, which is new for a lot of the contractors and hasn't really been done too much here. So with this, some of the constraints were the replacement costs. There's over 12 feet of cover on top of the culvert that we would have had to replace. Right-of-way issues because it's adjacent to a state park and county park. There's over 16,000 cars a day at this project. And then lastly, the utility issues, which you'll see on the next slide, how this DPL gas line went right underneath of the riprap and the pipe. If you were to replace this, you may be interfering with that gas line. So there you can see the 12-foot cover on top of the pipe, the 2-inch liner that we had planned to spray. And then there was a secondary culvert meant for bicycles and pedestrians. So here's a quick before and after of that. They filled in the corrugations, they ran their spin caster through, went really well. So I think, we had a good final product with this one. And I'll talk a little bit about the specifications. We've been working through the specs. It's kind of like a live document, just updating it as we go along, lessons learned. We figure out more stuff and, we add that on. So we've updated the unit of measure, we've detailed a work plan, and I'd say the biggest thing we've done is we've added a minimum cover over corrugation. So we want those corrugations filled, and then a 2-inch liner or, whatever the design thickness is to be applied on top of those corrugations. So we've been involved in some research. There's a pooled fund study ran by the University of Texas in Arlington, and that includes Ohio DOT, New York DOT, Connecticut, North Carolina, Minnesota, Florida, and PennDOT. So as you can see, they're all up there, and we're working to develop a structural design methodology, and it should be wrapping up within, the next couple months, and we may have some updates to our spec based on that. We're also doing research with University of Delaware, and we may do some in situ testing at a previously lined location, or do some actual lab testing to see, hey, why are these cracks occurring? Why aren't we getting the strength that we thought we should? So hopefully be able to take a little bit more detailed look, have a little bit more control, be in their lab, and we'll see what happens with that. So we're still trying to kind of coordinate things. And lastly, there was some NEPTEP testing that was done, and they have about, I think, 5 or 6 of the products in there with load testing. So we've kind of went through those results, compared them, and then trying to develop our own testing plan to supplement that. So lastly, I'll just talk about the lessons learned. So the SAPL supplier must have an approved plan. That's very important. We need them to come in, know what they're doing, give us, their order of operations and how they're going to lay things out, how they're going to track the thickness, how they're going to track, the mixing and all of that to ensure we get a good product. They must also sign and stamp the design and have it reviewed by DelDOT Bridge Design. And they have to follow the latest specifications, include a pre-lining meeting. We did that for 1-657 and 1-227. It really helped out to make sure that those projects went, a little bit better. Also recommend to include additional inspectors. So have one inspector up top to oversee the mixing process to make sure, they're not putting too much water because you're going to lower the strength, or, it's not clogging up the hoses too bad. And then have someone down in the pipe to verify the correct installation and the thickness of the lining to make sure there's no issues with that being installed. Make sure that they have the thickness indicators and collect testing samples each day. So we can, there's no real ASTM for coring the structure after the fact. So we need to take beams or cubes during the pouring on that day of the mixing and spraying, and then have those tested to verify the actual strength of what's going into the pipe. And lastly, that would all be coordinated with the material testing with our lab. This final product should be approved by DelDOT Bridge Design for final acceptance. And lastly, future SAPL. So there's the pipeliner bundle that is headed up by Bryce, and that consists of 3 locations. The pipes are pretty large. I think one is like 13 foot. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. And we will be using the geopolymer, which they've said they could go up to 18 foot, 20 foot pipes, which, I think that's, pretty huge. And hopefully we can, have some good control here and it goes well. Like I said, the UD research. And then we have a couple other new materials that we're looking at, the polyurethane spray liner, which we haven't used yet, but I'm hoping to test that out on a new project. And then UHPC, they actually have a UHPC liner. So Nick, talked about all the ins and outs of UHPC, and, we're not at that point yet. I think there's going to be more research that needs to be done, because if you're going to just take this very expensive material and spray it inside a pipe, you want to make sure you're getting the right, you get the right product at the end. So if anyone has questions, please leave them with John and I can answer them.
Yeah, we have a little bit of time for some questions. There is one question that came in. Is there a minimum pipe size or ideal size for SAPL?
So with our spec, it is geared towards structural. So it's 48 inches or bigger, which is considered bridge in our case. However, it can be used for drainage pipes. I think they've done, 10-inch all the way to 48-inch for drainage. And then, for actual bridges, 48-inch to, the 18-foot that I was referencing. Not that we've done the 18 in Delaware, but, maybe one day.
So if you're considering it, consult with bridge design and see what, steps are necessary.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all the questions we had. If you have any other questions, reach out to Jonathan directly and we'll be happy to answer those. Thanks, Jonathan.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.
All right, moving on. We're changing gears and getting into engineering support. Billy Sweeney will now be presenting a few tips and tricks on Unifier. Seems like we're changing a lot of what we're doing to Unifier, so pay attention.
Thanks, John. So I'm going to take maybe 15, 20 minutes, just go over a few things that we've come across as we've used Unifier over the last, I guess, going on 4 years now. Some new functionality that's been added that kind of allows our folks in the field to, to get a little bit more efficient in using Unifier. And I think a couple of these things are new enough that I don't think most of you know about them or haven't happened upon them just yet. So the first thing is that in the last version, they implemented a templating system for records. So an example of this would be if you're doing an inspector daily report and it's maybe one, like what I'm going to show you here today is like a weather type inspector daily report where it's typically the same exact thing. You're just tracking that there was no work done, because the weather wasn't acceptable, and you're only really tracking an MOT that might have been on site. So it's pretty standard from day to day on those types of things, or maybe just a few things that need to change. So I'll walk you through how to create a template, and then I'll have a short, maybe 2-minute video to show you just how quick you can create a new record from one of these templates. So when you're in the IDR section here, you just click on the actions button, and then you click where it says create from template. From there, you click the create button. You name the template that you want. In this case, like I said, I'm going to pick it as a weather IDR, right? This can be anything you want. It could be maybe just the way you start your IDRs because it's got some of the main details already aligned in or already typed in for you and added so that you don't have to keep doing the same thing over and over again, or copying from yesterday's IDR and then changing a bunch of stuff. Maybe you're just starting it from scratch, with a few main items that get added. So you click in the create button, and as you can see here, I've already got some of the stuff filled out. So I've already picked the contract in the top half there. I'm filling out some of the report details here. So I've been filling out things like maybe the location, if there's only one location that you're identifying. If you're always on site at the same time, or for the most part on site at the same time and leaving around the same time, you can fill that information out. General remarks, if there's any type of static general remarks that you're making every day, same thing, you can kind of put them here. And then in the weather here, if you want to fill these out. Now, creating a template seems like it's going to make it easy just for you to kind of mail it in and I'll just do a regular IDR and just hit submit every day. But our recommendation is if you're going to do things like the weather or fill these types of fields out, I highly recommend that the next day you review to make sure that the information that you're putting in here, no matter where you're putting it, is accurate. Obviously, we don't want anybody just putting bad information into any of these fields. So please, make sure you know what you're doing when you're filling this kind of things out. You can enter your personnel and equipment. You can see here that I have a couple of lines from a couple of contractors, a couple of crews that are on site. And I would typically, in this case, I would have some personnel assigned, maybe some equipment assigned already. I'm filling out bid pay items. So in this case, if your same MOT items are on the site every single day, you could automatically have these filled out and sitting there on every IDR that you submit. And you don't have to add them every day. It's just there already. If you were filling out the rest of these things like non-bid pay items, materials, visitors, issues, obviously you just fill those out. And then when you're done, since we're creating the template, you just click the save button here. You don't click complete. If you click complete, it actually sends this record as if you created an IDR. So in this case, we want to save it because we're creating a template that we're going to use tomorrow. So I hit the save, it comes up and tells me the template's been saved. And then here's a video that will show you just how quick you can create a template. So for most part, this all looks the same. You're going to click the actions drop down like I showed before. Again, we're clicking create from template, but now instead of clicking create, I'm clicking the little gear icon and then clicking create record. So it's going to open your IDR up and all the stuff that I filled out is there. So I've got a little tip there. If you finish one of your blocks of information, you can hide it by clicking on the name as long as you see that little arrow. So it makes it you don't have to scroll quite as much. You just click and you see it kind of hid that block. I'm selecting my daily activity date for today's day. I'm verifying, like I said before, the information is correct. Adding any remarks that I want. Selecting weather. Another tip is going to pop up here in these drop-down menus where you see a search bar at the very top, like in this next right here. You can begin to type and it will automatically kind of limit the list that you're seeing if it's a very long list. So you just select your time there. Again, just kind of filling out the weather information like you would do every day anyway. Again, collapse the block to make it easier to see things. That begins some general weather notes about the day. And then when I switch over to personnel and equipment, you can see the lines are already there. I didn't have to do anything additional. Maybe I need to go in and identify one person that maybe was on site today and wasn't there yesterday. Maybe a piece of equipment that they brought in and delivered for that day. Same thing with pay items. All my MOT items would potentially be there if you were tracking them on this IDR. And then, like I said, if you had identified any lines on any of these additional tabs, they would be there as well. From there, I'm hitting the send button like you do any other time on any other IDR, and you submitted your IDR. So took around 2 minutes, I think is what the video was, and we just a little bit over. And some of that was just me kind of going slow so that you can kind of see where the mouse was at. So lastly, when you're done with the template kind of module or function, make sure you hit the little X button in the top right-hand corner. It does like to kind of stick around and stay there if you don't close it. So just click that. So that's kind of creating from a template, and this can be used for more than just IDRs. It's really any record, any business process that we've created has the ability to create a template record. So, obviously they work just like you would normally create any other record on any other day. Next thing that I'll go over is the search and find. So if you're going to pick an item, say again for an IDR, this is what we've been doing the longest, so I'm kind of focusing on that a little bit. If you're going to pick an item and it's a new item from our master list, in the 2016 list, there's 2,000 items. Sometimes it's a pain to kind of search through what that is. There's a couple different ways, search through the list to find the item that you want. So there's a couple different ways you can do that. You can do a search, which searches every record in that process, or you could do a find on page, or you could do a combination of the two. So I'm going to show you that as I step through here and what those look like. So where you access that is in the top left-hand corner where you see that red line or red box right now. The icon on the left is the search button or the search function, and then the icon on the right there is the find on page. So first, we're doing the search function. You can see here in this screenshot, I clicked the search function, and then bottom right-hand corner where it says pay item name contains, I just started typing the word temporary, and it automatically starts to limit. You know, once you click that apply, it just kind of limits what you see in that list, takes it from the 2,000 records down to maybe 200 records, something like that. You click the apply button, you hit the X there in that corner, and you select your item. Find on page, it's very important to understand what I'm saying when I say find on page. So it's not find in the entire list of 2,000 items, right? It's find on the page you currently have active. So in this case, what I've done, I've clicked the find on page icon. I typed in the word temp in pay item name. Now this is a live kind of filtering. So as you start to type, it'll start to slow down. So, or it'll start to limit the list. So if you just type the letter T, it'll show you everywhere where the letter T shows up in every pay item name on that page that you have active. So in this case, I selected temp. And as I said before, it's important to note that this is the find on page. So if you have, like you have in this case, 2,076 items in this list, because as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, it says page 1 of 3, and we're only showing 1,000 per page, it's only going to show you the 4 items that have the word temp in them on that one page. So if I change that to 3,000, like you see now in the bottom right-hand corner, and I leave that word temp in there, now you can see I've got quite a few more items in there. So be real careful, very cognizant of what you're using that find on page for and how to use it. I typically recommend people just go in and change that display to 3,000 as soon as you open up the search page there, and that way the temp or the find on page kind of works similar to a search. Then next, I'm going to go through and kind of show you, you know, what it's like to combine both a search and a find. If you wanted to do something like that. So first, again, I'm clicking the search button. In this case, I'm just going to type in the letters CONC for concrete, and then I'm going to click apply. Then I'm going to click the find on page button here in the top left-hand corner again. It's going to close my search page, and then it's going to open up that find section of this log here. And then I'm going to type in that I know that it's a concrete item and it's in the 501 section. So I'm just going to type in the numbers 501. Right, so now you can see it's starting to limit my list a little bit. It actually tells you there in the bottom left-hand corner, I didn't highlight it, but it says search total is, I think that's 314 items now that it's found. And then if you want to cancel that search, you can just hit the cancel button, kind of clear that without having to do anything additional. Next, I'm going to say, you know, I know it's a concrete item. I know it's in the 501 section, and I know that it's a cubic yard unit of measure. So now I've typed CY for cubic yard, and now it's limited me down to just 3 items on the list. So now it's very easy for me to find it. I know I've probably taken a couple minutes to do this on the screen, but you can literally do it in 15 seconds to find those items that are in there. Then I'm selecting my item, obviously, and then it attaches it to whatever record I'm picking. And again, I'm showing you this based on like our pay items, but it really works for anything where you see this screen or this kind of setup for you know, in Unifier. So it could be items, it could be contractors, it could be our vendors, it could be, you know, whatever business process, however we set them up for you to be able to search them. The last thing that I have really is our construction manual wiki. We get a lot of questions, you know, about trying to find videos on how to do things or information on how we're using Unifier. And I point everybody back to this construction manual wiki that we've created. So it's constructionmanual.deldot.gov. Once you're on that site, you can go to Part F. The Part F is our e-construction section. And then the documentation portion of Unifier is section F3.0. There should be a link on the right-hand side. And then it will pull you up to this section where we have our different videos and different pieces of information related to Unifier. Obviously, this is a relatively short list right now, so it's being expanded as we add additional processes So always keep an eye on this. If you ever have a question, ever have a problem, you can't get a hold of somebody, for any reason, you can go here. I prefer you went here first. Watch the videos. The videos typically have some very descriptive kind of annotation on the videos to show you what what you should be doing, how you should be using each one of these processes. They're highlighting where the videos are at. That's pretty much all I got. So if there's any questions or anything like that, have any right now, then
No questions right now.
there's my contact information.
Feel free to reach out to Billy if you have any questions. Thank you very much, Billy. We'll be back in a little bit, I guess. Grace us with your presence again. We're going to keep moving on. Sticking with engineering support, Steve Wright, our stormwater engineer, will be discussing some lessons learned pertaining to stormwater and E&S.
Good? Yeah. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to Lessons Learned. Today, my name is Stephen Wright. I'm the stormwater engineer here at Delaware Department of Transportation. I'll be talking to you about lessons learned. My presentation will probably be a little different than most. I'm going to really focus on some of the lessons that I've learned over not just here in Delaware Department of Transportation over the last 8 months as a stormwater engineer, but in terms of all engineering in the state of Delaware. And in fact, if you were at the developers conference that was put on by Planning and Development Coordination about 2 years ago, you'll recognize the first beginning of this presentation. But the purpose of the presentation is that one of the lessons I have learned is that words matter. And in fact, there is a specific set of words that we use in stormwater and drainage that I think a lot of folks don't really understand. And that specifically is the difference between stormwater versus drainage. In our chapter 6, for instance, it says stormwater and drainage, but in fact, these are entirely different things, entirely different subjects, and really have to be treated differently. But before I do that, I do want to take a brief moment to do a quick shout out to DelDOT Toastmasters. If you are somebody who does give presentations, gives announcements, gives speeches such as this or any other type of speech, that's a really great organization to come to and giving yourself an opportunity to better yourself as a presenter, as a speaker. It will help you out tremendously. So moving on from there, that's just my quick shout out. In terms of stormwater, in the beginning, we all know it rained. And here in the state of Delaware, we know that rain means that we end up with one heck of a mess. And this is an example of one of those messes. This is actually possibly not entirely rainfall's fault. We're looking at a little bit of section of Route 9 there. So there's actually a good chance that that's going to be some tidal flooding involved. But the real problem with the rain isn't the mess that the water leaves on the ground that we then have to deal with. The real problem with the rain, the real mess it creates, is the legislation. Once there are laws involved, everything goes out the books. We all are having to deal with engineering, not in terms of what the actual engineering is, but in terms of the legislators wrote into law in order to make it what we're dealing with. As that plays out into the stormwater versus drainage discussion section, in stormwater law, we're really talking about water pollution being governed by the Federal Clean Water Act. That act then required each of the states to write their own series of regulations that basically reference back to the Clean Water Act. Stormwater is defined in the Clean Water Act as the runoff of water from the surface of the land resulting from any form of precipitation. Literally, if your water is coming off your land, it's stormwater. And the state of Delaware satisfies the regulation of this requirement via Title 7, Chapter 40 of Delaware Code. On the other hand, drainage is actually a much older thing in the state of Delaware. The requirements for drainage, the first laws, are at least in the 1800s that I'm aware of. Drainage of lands and management of waters is actually really, currently in Delaware law, it exists in two different locations. The first location is in the tax ditch program, which is a program that exists within Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control. It authorizes the state to create subdivision of land, just like so a town or municipality is a subdivision of land, so too is a tax ditch. The tax ditches are defined as folks who come together say they are willing to be taxed in order to have a system be built to drain their lands more effectively. And that's covered in Title 7, Chapter 41 of Delaware Code. Drainage means water management by drainage areas or watersheds to safely remove or control both excess surface floodwaters and damaging excess subsurface waters. As it applies to the other location in law, though, is actually in Title 17. This is fairly important to us. Title 17, of course, is transportation. In maintenance, as an example, maintenance is applied to constructed or reconstructed highways is the upkeep and support thereof with true surfaces in a hard, smooth condition, as when such highways were constructed or reconstructed and with proper and adequate drainage systems. Now, these are actually all direct quotes from the law, from Title 17, so I'm not going to go through all of them necessarily verbatim, but I did want to point out that this is fundamentally where the drainage aspect comes from. We are dictated by law that we are looking at this and maintaining this. But fundamentally, what is a road? A lot of us will have different views on what a road is. We have different visions and thoughts in our head about what a road is. You know, here's one of the things you might think of: the actual construction or repaving of a road. Some of us might think of the sort of the downtown landscape of Dover, Delaware. These sort of the idyllic town roads. You might think of, in this case, a slightly outdated version of Route 1, or you might think of one of our beautiful and majestic bridges that span the rivers and in this case, the inlets in the state of Delaware. But a probably more simplistic way to do it is what is actually written in the law, what is written in Title 17. This is the view that I would personally go with, mostly because in the end of the day, I work in the Delaware Department of Transportation because I get paid to work in the Delaware Department of Transportation. And like all of us, we have our paychecks because fundamentally at some point in time, the legislators chose to create a law. We can't have staff unless we have a law that we are trying to enforce. In this particular case, the law defines road herewith. It says road and highway include any public road or portion thereof, and any sewer, drain, or drainage system connected therewith, and any bridge, culvert, viaduct, or other construction or artificial way used in connection therewith, and anything which is accessory to any of the same or to the use thereof. Yes, that's to therewith, to thereof. Laws are fun, and words really do matter. This is why we get a paycheck. We get a paycheck because at some point in time, the legislators chose to write a law that said it is important to have roads and connection and moving people, and it is therefore necessary to have an organization that exists for the support of that. To go on a little bit more into the legal authority that the Delaware Department of Transportation has, most of it's in Title 17. I'm not going to get into this too much, but if you are sort of looking at why these words matter and what things that we're doing, the words matter fundamentally because it's summarized in these locations. These are just a few highlights. Technically, the entirety of Title 17 would apply, but you can start out with general jurisdiction, regulation of traffic, that gets you the MUTCD, access to state-maintained highways, that's development coordination, dedication of new roads for state maintenance, that basically gets into the acceptance of roadways in terms of construction and M&O. And finally, I start getting into some more unusual places where most people wouldn't think to look at the things that apply to the Delaware Department of Transportation, but Title 21, motor vehicles, Chapter 41, rules of the road, and finally, Title 9, counties, specifically how we interact with the counties. So this one is, at first blush, this is actually a slide that does exist from that previous presentation that I mentioned earlier that I gave in regards to the developers, but it is really important to us as well, because this is the section in 146, the access to state-maintained highways, in which the state law gave the Delaware Department of Transportation the right and responsibility to write those standards and regulations. So the department is authorized to adopt standards and regulations to maintain highway right-of-way drainage, to regulate the drainage from property leading into or carried by the highway drainage system. And further, no person, firm, corporation, or the like shall construct, open, reconstruct, maintain, modify, or use any crossing or entrance onto a state-maintained highway, street, or road, including any drainage modification leading into or carried by the highway drainage system, without first having complied with the standards and regulations adopted by the department and having obtained a permit issued by the department. Fun fact, if you were trying to figure out what the difference is between a standard and a regulation, you would have almost no lawyer willing to tell you the answer to that question. It's really not defined anywhere in law. General rule of thumb, a regulation is something we apply to somebody who is trying to get a permit for something. A standard is something that we have the right to apply because fundamentally we own the land, rather than the state of Delaware owns the land, and Delaware Department of Transportation has been assigned by the state of Delaware via Title 17 to be the one to control and maintain those lands. So we have the right to write a standard to say how those roads are built, because fundamentally it's our land that somebody else is coming into, as opposed to a regulation, which would apply to how they interact on their own lands. So because I've been talking about laws, and you can't do this very long without losing your mind, I threw in this fun little weird driving tips for the United States of America. These are all laws that exist in the USA. And the real reason I did this, I will fully disclose to you, is because clearly the people who created this had no idea where Delaware and Maryland are. And in fact, if you look at them, they have flip-flopped them. So Delaware is Maryland and Maryland is Delaware. But it really goes to show that, you know, laws fundamentally are written by legislators, usually in times where they're trying to do something very specific. And sometimes you really question whether or not those words needed to all be there. So if words really do matter, why in Connecticut was it necessary to make it illegal to shoot whales from a car? Surely you could have, you know, gotten rid of whales from that sentence and just maybe said it's illegal to shoot from a car. Maybe it's illegal to shoot aquatic mammals from a car. I don't know. But really, whales is probably unnecessary. Going that a little bit further, a little bit north of there in Massachusetts, it is illegal to pay a ticket if you've got a gorilla in the backseat of your car. That should be important. But when I think of that, I think to myself about those fine young men and women who work at Chick-fil-A. And I think to myself, listen, they're already disadvantaged. They're not even allowed to work on Sundays. That's half their work hours they got. And yet here it is in Massachusetts, perfectly legal to drive in with a gorilla in the back of my car in order for a banana shake or something like that. That doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem necessary. It is illegal to leave a sheep in an unattended truck in Montana. Now that seems kind of reasonable, though I don't know that you need to specify a sheep. It just seems like it would just be illegal. And finally, it is illegal to jump from a vehicle driving at 65 miles per hour in the state of California. This seems sort of unnecessary as well, just to simply say at 65 miles per hour. Surely you could say, you know, at greater than speed 65 miles or something like that. And really, what would happen if you say you just had your odometer set improperly and you jumped out thinking you're 165? Was that some kind of you know, attempt or something like that? I don't know. But little shot at levity because I'm talking about laws, and that is unbelievably boring. But do words matter? And you know, this is one of my favorite examples because here at the Delaware Department of Transportation, we have a road design manual. It's a manual. So it's actually standard, but we call it a manual. We have the Delaware Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. That's of course published as a regulation, as a manual. The DelDOT Development Coordination Manual. That's also a situation where that's a regulation. It's called a manual. A policy on geometric design of highways and streets. That one's actually standard. And finally, DelDOT's standard construction details. If anybody takes anything from this, it's the fact that I would desperately hope that whoever the managers or the uppers at DelDOT take it a minute when maybe, you know, when COVID's over and give somebody a pat on the back, or maybe give them a challenge coin or something along those lines. Because, you know, this bar is set pretty low, but the folks who did the standard construction details actually succeeded. That truly is a standard, and God bless them, they called it a standard. Good for them. Finally, so what do words, not finally, excuse me, I have a lot more to go. What do words mean? Stormwater laws and our obligations at DelDOT center around minimizing how much runoff, the volume of water, is leaving our sites, and the requirement to make sure that water that does run off meets some level of cleanliness. Drainage laws and our obligations at DelDOT center around helping water to leave our roads and the lands draining to our roads effectively without flooding those roads. So who noticed the problem there? Fundamentally, the issue is that drainage and stormwater laws are effectively opposing each other. The Shangri-La of stormwater management would have no drainage because it means no possibility of erosion or sediment-laden discharge downstream. The best possible scenario for drainage scenario would convey all runoff, all rainfall off-site and downstream as fast as possible in the case of Delaware to the oceans, with no best management practice in between you and the outfall. This is not possible. In order to serve the best interest of the public, design and construction practices must do both. And this leads fundamentally to the big confusions that we have in terms of stormwater drainage. Is fundamentally the engineers who apply it understand the math behind it. They see the hydraulics and hydrology, and they see the connection there. And they fail to understand that legally these are two totally separate entities, and in fact are not speaking to each other at all. So a couple examples of that, and these are just some of the simplest examples. The design storm requirements, the design storms for stormwater management are the RPV, the resource protection volume, which is a 1-year design storm. The CV is the 10-year design storm, and the FB, the flooding event, is the 100-year design storm. That's for the stormwater aspects. Now I switch over to drainage in the state of Delaware, DelDOT. Our design storms for DelDOT drainage requirements vary by functional classification. In other words, we say we have different requirements depending on how big the road is. This makes complete sense. Whether the conveyance system is open or closed drainage, spread requirements, or even whether or not the drainage system is in a depressed area, these all affect what the design storm is, as detailed in Chapter 6. And as I said, you can see it in Chapter 6. Now, this last item is something that doesn't directly apply to DelDOT. This is something that I left in from the development conference, but fundamentally it does anyway, which is conveyance must be approved via the pipe cover angle worksheet. That part can be removed. And the hydraulic grade line calculations and ponding requirements, that all stays the same. The pipe cover angle worksheet, for those of you who haven't worked on the outside, who haven't been a consultant, it's just a worksheet that Development Coordination created that did much the same thing that we do in-house at DOT anyway. There's a bunch of different versions of it. There's nothing magic to it. It's just for review purposes, they created that document. So actual lessons learned, so things that are actually important that I've learned in the 8 months or so that I've been the stormwater engineer at DelDOT. Please know your project outlets. This is not easy. It really isn't. And it's not obvious. It sincerely is not obvious. In the lower 2/3 of the state, this can be extremely challenging. Roman aqueducts, and it feels like most of Delaware, operated a slope of 1 foot of fall for every 15 feet of the aqueduct went. That's 0.067% slope. Water will flow when drainage is that flat. It worked for the Romans, but it's driven by the surface elevation of the water and not the ditch bottom in many cases. So if you're just looking at the ditch bottom, in most of the lower 2/3 of the state of Delaware, you're actually probably getting it wrong. Oh, you could be getting it wrong, we'll say. The outlet for any given project may not even be within the scope of the project. This is especially true for maintenance or reconstruction projects. Next lesson learned, actual lesson learned. Please use Gateway. The fine folks at Planning created this amazing tool for us. And the number of times I've said, come into a meeting at DelDOT and had folks just say, well, I don't really know what's going on there. And you say, well, why haven't you opened up Gateway yet? Within Gateway, you can look at the elevations, you can look at the contours, you can look at the property parcels, you can look at, is it a state maintained road or not? It's a municipal maintained road. You can go pop in from Gateway to go to the Google Street View. You can get a tremendous amount of desktop knowledge just by opening up Gateway whenever you're having a discussion about a project. This is an example of an actual question sent to me as a stormwater engineer. The state of Delaware, DelDOT, had been tasked by the state of Pennsylvania to give a response by the end of the day. And I was therefore tasked with having to give a response on something that obviously I didn't have a full survey of information on. I would have loved to have had a full survey of information. The survey is going to be better than the Gateway. But this is going to give me enough information to have a very good idea of what's going on and be able to give a detailed explanation of what the situation was. In this case, obviously, I was looking at the relatively severe slopes. There's about a 10-foot drop from our road down to the properties in Pennsylvania. But to continue that idea, please share any tools that you have that you know that make your job easier or more doable. Same example, same project. This is a situation where on the right-hand side, you see a nice image of rainfalls. It's not very clear from this image, but that rainfall amount was occurred over the course of 1 hour. This is an example from the Delaware Environmental Observing System. This is run by the University of Delaware. This is that you can just log on at any given time and you can look up weather data and information, historical and current, of about 50 connected mini weather systems. In actuality, there's far more than 50, but the 50 are the systems they've got put together fully that will provide all the data they have. They pull in data from a lot of other sources beyond those. And this can be invaluable in understanding issues that you see in the field. This particular rainstorm event, like I said, was about over the course of 1 hour. And if you look at that 4.11 in the very top of that of the state of Delaware, that's 4 inches of rain in an hour. To put that in perspective, Hurricane Sandy dropped about 4.17 inches over the course of 18 hours on Wilmington. So that was basically an entire hurricane's worth of rain over the course of 1 hour. Now, obviously down at the oceans, Hurricane Sandy did more like 10 or 11, 12 inches. But in Wilmington, it was about 4.1, just happened to be the same number. So that's a lot of rain. And so that was fundamentally the response that I gave is, hey, this is an extreme event. We have a lot of slope. It's naturally existing slope. But that was all information I can just pull from the resources that are available to us on desktop. What I designed from this, God willing, no. But it nonetheless gives you a good basis of information. It really gives you a great starting point from anything you're sort of looking at. Anybody move my screen? I talk faster than technology, folks. I apologize. So also lessons learned. Soil stockpiles. This is a rather fascinating subject. I would recommend not Googling Delaware soil stockpiles. Turned out there was an issue a number of years ago. One of our roads had somebody put some stockpiles next to it. Problems occurred, good times. So instead, you have a very low quality image there for what a soil stockpile is, because that's what I happen to have. So a soil stockpile is an issue that has plagued construction. To give you some background on this, the EPA and Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control are very concerned, obviously, with soil because it's what they regulate. And in most construction practices, if you look at it, say somebody's building a mall or a residential community or what have you, the first step is to go over it and clear and grub the whole site. You then pull the stockpile and you pull the topsoil and you stockpile it someplace on site because you're going to have to redistribute it when you want to grow grass later. Fundamentally, this isn't really how the Delaware Department of Transportation does our business. We're less interested in growing the grass, so obviously we have to do it alongside the road. But fundamentally, when we're doing construction, we're mostly trying to get that roadway built. But the problem is that construction kept getting written up on every one of their projects because of this subject. And so they had some concerns and they wanted it addressed. And so they came to us and we took a look at it and sort of drafted a few things. This is a work in progress, but it is a lesson learned. And the lesson fundamentally gets back to the idea that words do matter. It really was a miscommunication in terms of how DENREC and the EPA were applying things and how we do business and how to just marry those two ideas and make them work. A soil stockpile is defined as any location within limits of construction in which the contractor temporarily stockpiles soil for a period of 14 calendar days or more as part of normal construction activities. Per DelDOT standard specifications, assume that any soil stockpiled within the limit of construction shall be stockpiled or spread in a permitted manner consistent with the environmental permits or approvals. Is the contractor's responsibility to ensure these approvals are in place beforehand. So during construction activity, is their job to store the stockpile of material. If they are storing it for more than a period of 14 days, it becomes a regulated activity. And it's really that 14 days calendar is the key to it. DENREC understands that construction is happening every day, that the bulldozer moves a pile of dirt, the excavator digs a trench, and that material needs to be stored someplace. Some folks call that like an operating pile. It doesn't really matter fundamentally. The concern is simply that DENREC established that idea of once it is 14 days, then it is something that needs to be managed in a regulatory fashion. So these are just some frequently asked questions I got in regards to soil stabilization, soil stockpiles. Just to sort of reiterate this, this is probably the one issue that when people raised to me that I kept going to my boss, really, do I need to talk about this? It's a pile of dirt. But it was a real problem. It was causing consistent write-ups on our construction projects and really a tremendous amount of headache for the folks in both DOTS and construction. So, or also all folks in DOTS, I should say. So when does a soil stockpile become an item to be reviewed by the certified construction reviewer? Soil stockpile within limited construction for a period of 14 calendar days. It really does get down to as simple as that. If the material is sitting there for 14 days, it's a pile. It's a soil stockpile and it has to be regulated. When does a soil stockpile require stabilization? That also happens to be 14 days, which also leads to one of the confusions about this subject. So if it's been sitting there 14 days inactive, then the contractor is responsible both per DENREC and our standards to seed and mulch in order to stabilize it. So in other words, it's got something green growing on it so that it's not going to constantly erode every time it rains. It just happens that they're both 14 days. The calendar days before it becomes a regulated item and the amount of time where it can be inactive for 14 days. It just happened to be both 14 days. And unfortunate, because that does cause a lot of confusion. Hey, if it's in this Delaware Sediment Erosion Control Handbook, I don't actually have to do it, right? Well, I actually put this in just because I wanted to sort of defend our folks at DelDOT. We're not the only one who doesn't know how to use any words. DENREC also calls it the Delaware Sediment Erosion Control Handbook. That thing's actually published in law. So that is very much not a handbook or even a regulation or standard. So they didn't get their words right either. So I wanted to defend us a little bit and throw that in there. Calendar days, you mean working days? No, it really is calendar days. In terms of those of you who probably don't know, on average, the CCR's Certified Construction Reviewer, they show up on the sites on a periodic basis once a week. The old regulations, which are still in effect today, say it's once a week plus when there's been a major rainfall event. That rainfall event is going to go away. They're just going to be going to once a week pretty soon. So they're only out there once a week, but it's still 14 calendar days. So the first time the CCR is on site, they document there's a pile there. If 14 days later, in other words, 2 more reviews take place, it's still there. The CCR then basically says, hey, I got to write you up because this is a stockpile. It's been there for 14 days and you haven't protected. Or they show up on the 14th day, the 2 reviews later, and it has been protected, in which case there's no issues. If I redisturb the soil stockpile, does my time limit reset? Well, that actually depends. For the perimeter controls, in other words, is it a regulated soil stockpile? No. Once it's been there for 14 days, it's there for 14 days. It's now a regulated item. But in terms of the vegetative stabilization, no, you don't actually have to vegetatively stabilize a big pile of dirt that you're going to be sending bulldozers and excavators over and over again over the next 14 days. That's not reasonable. You just have to then put the perimeter controls around it. Doesn't the federal construction journal permit tell me that plans must show the location where sediment, soil, or other construction activities will be stockpiled? It does. We satisfy that simply by the limits of disturbance and limits of construction. We say that everything in this whole area is up for game, and that's how we satisfy that. And that is something that has been sent up to DENREC, and I don't think the EPA has specifically gone after us yet for it, but at least that part is clear and understood. I'm going to jump to finally one more item I have. Lessons learned, sequence of construction. Any changes to the sequence of construction can cause lots of problems. And this is not a lesson that's being learned new. This is something that happens over and over and over again. It's just a part of construction. The fine folks at construction have to manage this every day of their jobs. One of the things that has happened, though, is that the erosion sediment control, anytime there's a revision to the erosion sediment control, the regulations basically say that it has to be redlined and it has to be documented. So one of the tools that does now exist, but we've been created fairly recently, is this erosion sediment control revision form. When construction through their ESL, erosion sediment liaison, basically when they see something that's going to need to be redlined, when they see a change that needs to take place, this tool now exists for them to go in there, simply fill it out. It details what type of revision is occurring. They have an opportunity to put a write-up of what it is. And then they also have the opportunity to say who needs to approve it. That could be the erosion sediment engineer, Tang, you'll hear speak later. It could be the stormwater engineer, myself. It could be construction. It could even be the original engineer of record. Unlikely the engineer of record, because mostly we're talking about erosion and sediment control revisions on this particular subject, but these types of things can happen. So this allows us to forward that around and make sure everybody's on the right page in terms of understanding who needs to approve what changes. And with that, at least I believe, I am done. I do have to apologize for this particular questions slide. When I created this presentation, I was the last one before lunch, and the lunch happened to be lasagna. And so I thought this was a great ending slide. I used to have a really amazing slide that I had at the end of every one of my presentations in regards to stormwater and drainage, because it was a picture of rutted tracks, going straight across the construction site. They then plowed right through a set of silt fences and straight down into a wetland and out the other side. And some fine individual on the remaining small section of silt fence that hadn't gotten destroyed by this truck had spray painted a total of 7 letters. The first 3 were WTF, and the next 4 were John, ? And it's important to understand that we all have questions, and we can all learn from the issues that our coworkers and friends have. And so it is important to always ask your questions. And I would really love to be able to find that picture again, but I think I might have left it at DENREC, so I'm very upset. So what you're stuck with is Garfield passed out in lasagna, which is also a fine message to say. But if you do have any questions, feel free to ask them. And with that, I'm done.
All right, thank you, Steve. There's no current questions. If you do have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to Steve Wright directly. So now we're going to move on to ADA. We have our ADA Title II Coordinator, Tom Nickel, and our Deputy Director of Operations and Support, Jim Pappas. They'll be discussing scoping, documentation, and the updating of the task manual.
Good morning. My name is Tom Nickel. I've been about 20 years, but I've only been in this position, the ADA Title II Coordinator, for about 3 months. So I don't have a lot of lessons learned in my current job, but I did want to bring some high-level issues up to the department. Some topics I'm going to touch on are 2011-2012 ADA collection, limited specific data within that collection, dates, inventory for decisions, and taking credit. So DelDOT is an ADA Title II public agency and required to have a self-evaluation and transition plan. This is a review of DelDOT programs and services and an inventory of the pedestrian network under DelDOT jurisdiction, along with a schedule to remedy non-compliance. The original ADA collection was performed in 2011-2012 and was a static snapshot without much thought to updating the data for inventory management or progress reporting. The data collection method used yes or no answers and when the inspector got to a compliance or non-compliance, it was just a simple yes or no, and there's not much specific data at the facility. A good example is a curb ramp where there was no DWS. It was just noted as non-compliant, and there's no additional data. So realizing the ADA inventory can be used for data and decisions, the ADA section and engineering support are collaborating on a new data collection process. This process is called the ADA Construction Inspection Application, or ACIA, and has been developed as a mobile field application that collects data for ADA compliance. The data is saved and available for future decisions. The ACIA reports directly to the ADA inventory so DelDOT can report progress on the transition plan. This is an image from the ADA inventory map along SR1 between Rehoboth and 5 Points. The image shows linear features and point features, including sidewalks, pedestrian connections, pinch points, plus patron pads. Blue denotes compliance, red denotes non-compliance, and of significant importance is the purple, which denotes missing links. The reason I'm bringing this up is DelDOT designed, constructed, and accepted a pedestrian-centric project that updated non-compliant features and filled the missing links. Because of the static nature of the DelDOT inventory, DelDOT cannot take credit for the improvements. This is an image from the transition plan. It shows part of the inventory in Newcastle County, including non-compliance, or total number of features that were assessed, non-compliance, compliant, and a percentage of each. DelDOT originally drafted the transition plan in 2014-2015, and finalized the plan in 2018, with some updates to the ADA inventory in 2016. The updated information used prior ADA inspections and data through a desk audit, and also clarified DelDOT's jurisdictional responsibilities. Overall, the objective of the self-assessment and transition plan identifies responsibilities, ADA deficiencies, and a scheduled remedy non-compliance. So DelDOT, as a recipient of federal funds, has a responsibility to subrecipients who are those who receive federal funds or aid from DelDOT for projects and services. Title II of the ADA requires all public entities, programs, and services to be available to users and not to discriminate against persons with disabilities. DelDOT is providing aid and assistance to local public agencies and municipalities, which creates a subrecipient relationship. DelDOT's ADA Title II obligations, these are independent for DelDOT, include a self-evaluation, transition plan, non-discrimination statement, practices, a grievance process, an ADA Title II coordinator. DelDOT is also responsible to ensure that any aid or service or programs that benefit other public entities, such as local governments, do not discriminate against persons with disabilities. Subrecipients also have general ADA Title II obligations similar to DelDOT. Subrecipients are also required to ensure that programs and services do not discriminate against persons with disabilities. Depending on the number of employees, the subrecipient also has obligations such as a self-evaluation, transition plan, a non-discrimination statement, and practices, grievance process, and a person designated as the ADA Title II coordinator. The Office of Civil Rights ADA section is working to develop a program to help subrecipients meet ADA Title II obligations and maintain funding participation from and through DelDOT. Why is this important? The relationship helps public and users, so public improvement projects do not discriminate against persons with disabilities. So now onto something that's more interesting. What I've seen briefly is project scope. Why is project scope considered? It's relative to the intent and impact on the pedestrian network. Project scope cannot avoid or skip over facilities in the project limits and must not create a negative impact to pedestrian accessibility. New construction projects are required to meet full ADA compliance. Reconstruction projects, which is rebuilding along existing alignment or adding some new features, requires full ADA compliance, but may deviate depending on factors such as structural impacts to buildings, environmental impacts, historic impacts, right-of-way availability. Alteration projects, more limited in scope, and only correct features affected, such as curb ramps when street level pedestrian crossing is altered during the pavement activity. Maintenance, which is generally focused on maintaining or preserving current facilities. A combination of maintenance activities may rise to an alteration. Roadway patching as a mill and overlay does rise to an alteration if the street level pedestrian crossing is altered. If you have questions about scoping a project, please reach out to the ADA section for clarification. So here are some examples of what I've seen. There's an image missing. Okay. So next slide. Oh, there it is. So these are two pictures of a recent paved rehab project. It's at the same entrance. On the left, it shows the limit of paving. There is a non-compliant ADA ramp. There is no cut through at a median island, and there is a reconstructed pedestrian connection on the opposite side of the crossing. This was taken from the plans. It also shows the red line. It shows the limit of construction, and it shows the location of the two pedestrian connections. It's clear the intent of the project through the limit of construction was to hold the curb line, reconstruct one ramp, which is on the left, not disturb the street level or pedestrian crossing through the entrance, and not address the curb ramp on the right. So why was only one pedestrian connection reconstructed and one was not? It's the project scope after consulting with the manager. However, the actual construction activity changed the intended project scope since the paving altered the pedestrian crossing. And now the project is responsible to address the non-compliance associated with the crossing, including the channelized island and the pedestrian connection. So this is another example. There's apparently newly constructed sidewalk immediately abutting a known barrier, which is a barrier curb with a pedestrian connection on the opposite side of the street. It's kind of interesting because the picture on the right looks like there's a gentleman standing there scratching his head, wondering why this happened. So why was the barrier curb left in place? It's unknown. Was this outside the scope of the project? Did the scope meander or skip something that should have been addressed? Don't know the answers without consulting the project manager. So this is another issue that may come up during scope. The ADA requires grade breaks that are perpendicular to the path of travel. The image shows green line, which is the path of travel for the pedestrian through the intersection. The red line shows the grade breaks, and the fuchsia circles show the slope of the ramps leading to the grade breaks. Under the scenario in the image, while showing the alignment in the primary crossing direction, users are traveling the continuous sidewalk and not entering the street level crosswalk will cross two grade breaks at the bottom of the ramp section, and the grade breaks are not perpendicular to the path of travel. This motion will upset the wheels on a wheelchair, causing loss of contact when crossing the grade break. In addition, the user approaching from the side road is required to realign more than 90 degrees to cross the street level crossing. An alternative for this would be a type 2 pedestrian connection, or what's called a dual approach parallel ramp, and a lower landing turning space with all grades, including the approach on the ramp and at the curb line, perpendicular to the path of travel. This alternative will require a clear space at the base of the cut through for realignment with the crosswalk, but will meet regulatory requirements for all users traveling the sidewalk using the crosswalk, as well as users using the crosswalk. So some new things that you will see from the ADA section is involvement in project acceptance. This is just a little image that's coming from the ADA inspection report, and I'm highlighting it because it shows a no, and that no means the facility was non-compliant. So the current ADA inspection resolution process is managed in engineering support with technical collaboration between engineering support and the ADA section. Engineering support and the ADA section are working to update roles and responsibilities, and the proposed process will have engineering support generate an initial ADA inspection showing compliance status. Once the initial ADA inspection is generated and sent to the administrative section, engineering support responsibilities will take. The ADA section will then work with the administering section to resolve ADA compliance. And once compliance is confirmed, the ADA section will generate a final ADA inspection report and sign off on the project prior to acceptance. One thing that is very important to understand is the importance of ADA inspections for all projects, whether they're construction, reconstruction, alteration, maintenance activities. It's important to know the status of the ADA facilities so the inventory and data are updated for decision purposes. Good data equals good scoping versus bad data with questionable outcomes. So why is all of this important? Good to poor relationship leads to more interaction during construction and project acceptance with questions to the designer and project manager. The good to good relationship with good decisions and good documentation is the most efficient process. A poor to poor relationship leads to delays, frustrations, administrative time circling back with all that are involved at the end of the project to recreate the story and document it. ADA inspections are critical for all projects so DelDOT can accurately update the ADA inventory. The accuracy of the ADA inventory will assist with all project scoping decisions and also help with transition plan report. Please consider project scope and decisions during all phases of the project. When needed, document decisions to help a successful outcome. So the ADA section recently has created a generic web or generic email address that's distributed to a number of members. It's dot.adasupport@delaware.gov. I encourage you to send any questions to this email address. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jim Pappas from Operations Support. I appreciate Tom's presentation, so I'm going to kind of go on a little bit from there, talking specifically about the pedestrian accessibility standards manual update that we're doing, and kind of go a little bit on with what Tom was saying about project delivery. Okay, so those that may be familiar with the pedestrian accessibility standards or the PASS manual, the current manual was completed in 2018. Hard to believe it was that long ago. But that's basically the guideline that is to be used for the designing of the accessibility standards. And we knew when we drafted it, just like we do with any other manual, that folks that deal with those, whether it's standard specs or some of the manuals that Stephen was talking about, is as soon as you hit send, it's outdated because something is going to change with it. So we knew that when we put that document out, it was going to need to be changed. So here we are in 2020, 2021 now, and we're ready to update it. So we put a steering committee together, kind of getting a cross-representation across the department and also external partners, folks that we felt could provide some really good input on this manual. So that committee was started back in October. And you'll see there are basically three kind of points that we wanted to get out of this update. Making sure, obviously, first and foremost, that everything in the manual is compliant with the federal standards. How consistent are we with other states? ADA is a somewhat evolving process, so we wanted to see kind of what are some best practices from some other states, not recreate the wheel, obviously, and what should be the minimums within that standards. Those that are familiar with the MUTCD manual, there's a lot of shoulds and shalls, and it's funny when you talk to people who don't kind of work in this industry, they don't understand the difference. I know when I review documents, sometimes it says should. It's like, well, do you realize the difference between a should and a shall? And people don't understand that. When you write a spec, and I'm looking at Danny, and I know he's smiling under that mask right now, and he's maybe having some flashbacks, but should and shall mean different things. Shall means you will do it. Should means, it's kind of nice. So you don't have to necessarily, sugarcoat. If you want something done, just say you shall do, just like you do with kids. You shall do X, Y, or Z. Not, it'd be nice if you, came home tonight and, no, you're going to be home by 10 o'clock. So this is off of the DelDOT website. So the PASS manual is a public-facing document, and it's readily available for folks to see. As you can see there, we are in the process of updating that. So that's the existing document. The existing document, again, it was a very good document to start because we basically didn't have anything before then, but it's just like anything else. As we kind of use that manual over the years, we saw some things, and some folks within DelDOT basically started taking notes originally when we started with that, and they were able to provide some really good feedback and some comments to say, maybe we should tweak this, maybe we should tweak that. So we certainly appreciate those comments. So our timeline for the update, this is a very aggressive schedule, and we understand that. We have GPI on board as our consultant to update this with their experience with this. Our goal is by July of this year, so within a few months that we have this document updated. Again, we started in October, and by July we want to have a document ready that's ready to be implemented. We meet weekly every Friday morning at 8 a.m. What a fabulous time to have meetings every Friday at 8 a.m. to talk about a PASS manual. Man, if that doesn't get you excited for the weekend, I don't know what will. So how the new PASS manual is going to be laid out, various chapters there. Introduction, project type and application of standards, the design standards, design consideration, inspection and acceptance, and request for practical exceptions. So that's the RPEs that you may be familiar with, the request for practical exceptions. When the existing PASS manual was kind of envisioned, the RPE was mostly used in the design phase, and we've seen over time that construction sometimes runs into unique situations that may not have been addressed during the design phase. So there's discussion of kind of how do we differentiate that moving forward. So that's being looked at. And again, all of the lessons learned, but lessons learned we've learned over the last couple of years with the PASS manual is why we are updating this manual. Yeah, there we go. So the chapter, we're going to have a chapter on just the acceptance criteria. And again, Tom kind of mentioned that earlier during his presentation. Again, just kind of some examples of situations that have arisen in the field. We need to memorialize the acceptance and inspection process. Again, Tom did a great job explaining, I think, why that's so important for the department to do that. So we are going to provide a little bit greater detail in this updated manual to specify that in a little bit more detail. Again, so this is going to be under Chapter 5, and again, this is just some of the examples that we've run into. The upper right-hand corner there shows, Tom mentioned the new app that has been created and is being worked on. Those are some of the spreadsheets, those in the field that have seen the spreadsheets with the various measurements. It's just kind of some examples of what you'll see in the updated manual. So ADA moving forward. So we talked about the manual is being completed. So again, the target is this summer, July, we should have a new manual. We will also have, kind of piggybacking behind that, will be additional training. Whether you're an experienced designer or a non-experienced designer, we kind of want to show you what the updates have done and where we're going with the manual. Continual communication engagement. So I mentioned about the past manual and certainly appreciate all those that are involved in the update of that. And again, we meet every Friday. Another thing, and I want to shout out to Maureen and her team, John and Mark Bucklow in construction. We meet every Wednesday at 8:30 to go over ADA items from across the state so that we can kind of be involved on them and kind of keep things moving along, know of any issues. Again, ADA, just like ENS, is critical for the department, and we have weekly ENS meetings as well at 8 a.m. on Wednesdays, reoccurring meetings, and again, appreciate the teams that are involved in that because we need to make sure we stay on top of these issues and we can address them as quickly as we can so that they don't linger. So appreciate everybody's communication in that. We need to be solutions oriented. I think that's a really good thing that the department has overall is most people are looking to problem solve when issues do arise. So just keep that going, keep the communication. Learn from previous experiences. Again, there's a wealth of knowledge across the department, and learning from others is always a great thing. And I can't stress anymore what Tom referenced about the data. All the information that's collected, all those data points that are being collected are being collected, and they need to be shared with the public because the ultimate goal is we need to ensure that there are accessible routes for the public so that they can get from their homes to go get a cup of coffee at Wawa or get Dunkin' Donuts or wherever they may be going. So we need to ensure that. So we want to have that public-facing map so that somebody will know very easily how they can get from point A to point B. So collecting this data and updating our information is going to be critically important. And I believe that was it.
Thank you very much, Jim and Tom. We don't have any questions at this time. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to one of them or use the ADA mailbox that's been developed. So you're running a little ahead of schedule, but that being said, we're going to take a break now. We're going to return at 10 after 10. So thank you all and enjoy your break. right, welcome back, everybody. I hope you got refueled and some coffee. We're getting into our last couple presentations of the day. Our next presenters will be Ting Guo and Nate Zimmerman from the E&S section, discussing some hot topics and some lessons learned. Bear with us for a second. Seems to always happen after the break, right?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ting Guo. I'm the E&S engineer. I'll be presenting today with Nate Zimmerman, the E&S program manager. Just FYI, as Jim mentioned, everything Nate and I talked about today will be shall, not should. So FYI. And also I heard save the best for the last. Since we're the second from the last, we're pretty important. So yesterday, Sarah Esposito from Maintenance and Operation, she talked about the BMP lesson learned. That's after construction. And just now, Steve Wright, he talked about some drainage and stormwater management. That's before construction. So Nate and I are during construction for E&S concerns. First, I want to talk about the new MPDS construction general permit. It was signed by DENREC on March the 1st, and it will be effective on March the 11th, which is this week. This new CGP has eliminated the post-rain event inspection requirement for E&S. Still, weekly inspection and record keeping are still required. What does that mean? That means for projects that are marked major, a CCR will be assigned, and him will complete the weekly report. For projects that are marked minor but have disturbance area for more than an acre, NOI is required. A DelDOT weekly self-E&S inspection is required to be completed by a minimum responsible personnel, which is a blue card. I was just told by Nate that DENREC has put the blue card training online so that you can do it on demand. You don't have to wait for the quarterly training they usually have. So this is the self-inspection form just mentioned. On the left-hand side, it's an old example. I guess we need to cross that rain event inspection soon. On the right-hand side, it's what's in unifier. They're mostly drop-down menu, so it shouldn't be that difficult for the inspector to complete it. Also, Steve, he touched base on that we recently implemented an erosion sediment control revision form. I just want to point it out. It's available in DRC Design Resources Center under construction. E&S control revision form and change approvals and responsibilities. I just want to talk a little bit in detail about the red line plan revision process. As you may all know, whatever is going to be constructed, 99% of the time is different when it's designed. But for DENREC and the EPA, when they show up on the construction site, the first thing they ask about is the most current plan and or an NOI if it's available. A lot of the time, there's a red line or plan revision needed. We have a process in place. If it's if the change affect the permanent proposed features, it will go back to the designer of the record. If it's just other changes like sequence change, adding, removal, ENS controls, things like that, most of the time the ESL or me, or maybe Steve can handle it. This is the approval authority individuals. Steve is the stormwater engineer. I'm the ENS engineer. We have 3 ESL for each construction group. They will take care of maintenance and operation projects also. And sometimes Trevor from environmental stewardship, he has to say yes and no if it's involving wetland and other environmental issues. On the right-hand side, that's a revision form that Steve showed you guys, talking about what changes made, who's approving it, etc. But this is a table regarding who has the authorization to sign and change what. As you can see, most of the time, the ESL can handle it. Next topic, I want to talk about the ENS control used for in-stream work. 3 aspects. Like you might be aware, when doing in-stream work, or either having the existing stream going around or through the work area. Clean water bypass division is important. Sealing well and stabilized outflow critical to the job. And also when dewatering the work area, some pits, pumps are most used because of the time, most of the time, the job will have a dewatering permit from DENRAC. Flow meter is required to measure the flow rate. The CCR will check it, so make sure the flow meter is working. Also, another important aspect for the in-stream work is removal of sediment. Portable sediment tank, dewatering bag, dewatering basin, turbidity curtain, they can all be used. Sometimes we have problems like, the dewatering bag is full, no one's changing it, it's really not removing any sediment. Or the turbidity curtain is installed particular to the channel flow, which shouldn't happen. So I just want to talk about this issue. This is what we encountered in the field on a lot of occasions. And if you have any questions, come back to me or Nate or even the stormwater engineer. So with that, I'll give it to Nate. He'll go into the hot topics.
All right, hi there. I'm going to introduce myself, Nate Zimmerman, and I'm going to be a new face for a lot of you. Thanks, Mark. And I'm a recent DENRAC transplant, so I had the pleasure of regulating DelDOT from my job at DENRAC. That's the perspective I try to bring to this position. The topics I'm going to discuss today are were gathered from our ESLs, from our consultant CCRs. I basically reached out to them and said, what problems are you seeing in the field consistently? And so that's where this list is going to come from today. All right, so we're going to start at the end with final stabilization. The CCRs are no longer collecting your seed tickets or reporting on the application of 6 inches of topsoil for the most part, depending on which of the contract documents that CCR was hired under. But what I'm looking for here is that we're ensuring reseeding is performed during the spring and fall growing periods. We cannot miss those opportunities. In Delaware, we've got about a 1 month period where we can pretty much guarantee a successful growth of grass and achieving final stabilization, and that's 1 month in the spring, 1 month in the fall. Anything outside of that window, and you start to lose your germination rate, and you're going to just lose success with your stabilization efforts. So making sure you hit those windows is very important. And the reason we brought this up is we have projects extending several growing seasons, or maybe over a year now without final stabilization. They're missing their windows. They might go in and try in August, and we're just not getting the grass growth that we need. Another thing that you can do is start reaching out to your contractors now for this spring growing season. Ask them for their plans to mobilize. When you know they've mobilized, have an inspector there. Have the seeding or stabilization effort checked out. Make sure it was done properly so you don't lose that window waiting for them to remobilize. All right, so next I'm going to talk briefly about SWIP-Track. If you've not heard of SWIP-Track or not received a SWIP-Track report, you will at some point. Currently, we have 2 versions of SWIP-Track out there. There's the SWIP-Track DOT, and then there's a regulatory version of that. So the DOT are what all of our CCR consultants are using, and the regulatory inspection is what I'm using right now on older projects. So if you see a SWIP-Track email come through, it is not a virus, although Mark may beg to differ on occasion. It is an actual report coming from us, and it's important that you open it and read it. The main reason I want to bring this up is to let you know how much training is available. So it's not just the inspectors that are performing the inspection that have this training available. If you receive a report, you can call SWIP-Track and you don't know how to interact with that database or what to do, you contact SWIP-Track. We have prepaid them for all the training in the world for you. So take advantage of it. I gave the contact information there. All right, like Steve, I'm going to talk about laws and regulations, but I'm going to keep this super brief. This next portion is talking about BMP review during construction and why it's required. So number one, it is required by Delaware Sediment and Stormwater Regulation. I'm not going to sit here and read this to you. That would be crazy. I have highlighted a few important parts. The very first sentence, all stormwater management systems shall be reviewed. That's a shall. The owner shall provide adequate notice to the department or delegated agency. We are the owner, the department, and the delegated agency. So who are we giving notice to? We're giving notice to our CCRs. And again, it's a 48-hour notice. They have to be there, get photographic documentation of construction and stormwater management system. Now, outside of the fact that it's the law, why is it important? You can see this is from the ENS pre-con checklist. We're going to perform stormwater construction checklist and submit checklist to the ENS section. That is performed by the CCR. So at DelDOT, we've put this responsibility on the CCR to provide the photographic documentation as well as perform this checklist and submit the checklist to the ENS section. That's very important because that checklist is now part of the as-built survey, and ultimate acceptance of that BMP, final acceptance, relies on that checklist being performed and the photographic documentation. These are things that you can typically go back and get pictures of. We're talking largely about things that are, subgrade or practices that took place during construction. So we need to document those. Now, you mentioned before, or I mentioned, the CCR's responsibilities to do that inspection. The ENS pre-con form puts the onus on the contractor to provide that 48-hour notification. Now, on the DelDOT side, if you're a DelDOT inspector and you see work being done on a sediment basin and no CCR around inspecting it, you want to ask questions. You want to ask the contractor if they notified, maybe reach out to the CCR. It might be that the work that's going on isn't something that necessarily has to be documented, but always ask those questions so that we don't miss those windows of opportunity. The third thing is not a law. That is my opinion. Third-party inspection only benefits the contractor. I'd love to see Mark's face when I say this. I actually see the cheeks coming up over the mask now. And provides a blanket of protection in the case of BMP failure and is a critical part of infiltration practices as well as BMPs with any hidden subgrade infrastructure. I'm going to explain my opinion to you now. So for every BMP, there is certain construction practices that have to take place. So that CCR is a third party. They are not DelDOT. They are not the contractor. And they can clearly document that those construction practices were done properly. So say for a bioretention, an infiltration basin, you have to excavate those either from the side. You're not allowed to have heavy equipment on the final grade of the basin. That CCR will document all of that, the fact that it took place. And what I'm looking forward and trying to avoid is failure of this BMP. Failure is not always a result of construction practices, but normally it's the first place people are going to point when that happens. So by that contractor having that third-party inspection take place, they are protecting themselves against those pointing fingers if a BMP fails. Here's another example, properly excavated infiltration basin. Now this thing has been kept a foot high, that's a requirement. The contributing drainage areas primarily stabilized. And every one of these BMPs has its own individual sequence of construction that needs to be followed. That's another thing that CCR will document. And the reason we do that is so we don't end up with this as a failed infiltration basin. I guarantee you, the first thing they're going to do is point towards the contractor when this happens. Wouldn't it be fantastic to have, you know, months or weeks of documentation of the proper excavation techniques, the proper sequence, and all of that? This could be a water table issue, or it could be a simple clay lens. But one thing we're going to know is it wasn't construction that caused this if we get that documentation. And it's also very important. It used to be just a 48-hour dry down time. That was it for infiltration practices. Now in Sarah's presentation, you heard her say she doesn't like them anymore. This is probably one of the reasons why. Infiltration testing is now required. So there's a numerical value you're going to be tested upon. Document and prove that you did not cause that failure. All right, the next thing is ensuring permit coverage for all disturbances. Here's a very simple cheat sheet. If you're out there listening to this and you wonder whether you need a plan or not, over 5,000 square feet and under 1 acre still requires a plan. There are standard plans for that, and there are these pre-formed standard plans, cookie cutter, that fit certain activities so that you get very quick review and approval to cover your activity. A couple examples are just linear disturbances, stockpiling, things like that. You notify Steve, who spoke earlier, we can get you a plan right away for those activities. Now, 1 acre and up requires an approved plan. It requires a notice of intent, requires weekly inspection and reporting. And it requires all of those documentation of all those things be kept on site for regulators. You'll see why that's important in a little bit, the distinction between those two plan types. So disturbance are figured out through the total of the disturbed area. So you need to be considerate of your offsite stockpiles and things like that. Just rolling across the ground, killing the grass outside of the LOC can be counted as a disturbance in DENRAC's eyes. Maybe you think, I'm disturbing 4,000 square feet a day. I'm doing rolling stabilization, and I'm never going to have more than 4,000. I don't need that. That's not the way it works. It's the total of the amount of area you're going to disturb. And although rolling stabilization may get you out of some certain BMP requirements, we might be able to downgrade your silt fence, compost filter logs and things like that, the plan and permit coverage is still a requirement based on that total disturbed. All right, DENREC is watching, and that's not just meant to say they are our regulatory agency and that they regulate us. They are literally watching, pulling over on the side of the road, taking pictures, calling me, emailing Ting, emailing Mark, reaching out and letting us know that they're literally watching us. So if you have any doubt whether your activity needs a plan or not, inquire, just ask the question, let us help you. For all of those no plan violations, an NOV can be given right away. So that's a notice of violation from DENREC. That's going to go secretary to secretary. In order to avoid that, ask questions ahead of time. All right, so LOC or limit of construction violations. You never want to work, stage, materials, or stockpile outside of the approved LOC. Now, there's two reasons for this. One is obviously to negate environmental impact. We have perimeter controls because they are covering the entire perimeter of our LOC. We ensure we're not going to cause an environmental impact outside of that. Even with no environmental impact, if you go outside the LOC, your sub 1 acre project might now go over the 1 acre, and we are now on a permit violation for not properly documenting that, with a plan change that we have expanded our LOC, we now need an NOI for this project. So ESLs are in place. They can quickly revise this. Ting just brought this up. Steve has mentioned it. So you can get a revised plan, you get a revised LOC very quickly with the ESL. It has to be done before the disturbance, not after. Well, what we don't want are ESLs run around fixing LOC violations, but instead expanding LOCs to avoid violation. Perimeter control removal. So silt fence, compost logs, they all go in on the job. Eventually, they all come out. They go in just fine, but if you're removing them, just know you absolutely have to have approval to remove those controls. It's written right in the plan. You have to follow that. So the ESL can redline the removal of controls are no longer needed. Be proactive and request removal for controls which are no longer needed but are still on the plan. What that means is that I've had contractors reach out. I don't need the silt fence anymore. I'm getting written up for it every week. It's sitting on the top of a hill now. Why do I even need it? The CCRs will inspect towards that plan. So be proactive, reach out to the ESL, get that BMP removed so the CCR can stop inspecting it. Because you will continue to be written up for it as long as it's on the plan. Dewatering, now Ting covered this, so I'm not going to cover it in any great detail. This is, again, a dewatering cheat sheet. If you're not filtering on the intake and discharge ends of your dewatering operation, you're in violation. So always know, filtering with a sump pit or some other device on the intake, sediment bag or some other device on the discharge, and you're good to go. When I taught CCR class for DENREC, I always taught this was the source of most violations. And when I saw a pump on site, that's the first place I always went when I started a site inspection. I'd go check that dewatering before the pump could get turned off. Something I used to do for the contractors under me at DENREC. If you're unsure, ask for guidance and help setting up your system. So I would always volunteer. When you're going to set up a major dewatering operation, I would go out on site and approve that discharge when they turn that pump on, approve it ahead of time. The last thing I wanted was a phone call from, say, the DelDOT inspector coming by my job site and seeing muddy water leave, and I didn't even know they were pumping. So, now I can, I always offer, let us know. We'll make sure you're following the best available technology standard. There is no turbidity standard for discharge. So it's up to the eye of the inspector. Give us a chance to get out ahead of that, and I'll go to bat for any contractor that allows me to pre-approve their system. The ESLs, CCRs, and myself are available to help with that. All right, so I'm trying to do a friendlier approach to sediment and stormwater compliance. We are always held within the framework of the federal and state sediment stormwater regulations. So those are minimum standards. I cannot be more lenient than that. An example of that is everybody's favorite. You get one U, now you've got a non-compliant inspection. There's no way to work around that kind of stuff because that is the federal standard right from the EPA to us. But since June, as I've handled some of these issues with CCR reporting and giving guidance to how things are reported on, I've been able to tweak several areas to make things a little more friendly for the contractor. Here's a quick example of that. So these are guidance for, I can't see because of the thing, I forget what I put up there, but for BMPs which are not installed which are installed, which are not shown on the plan. So an example would be the contractor and DelDOT construction reviewer or inspector see dirty water leaving the site. They say, look, we can't have that. We're going to throw up an extra compost log there. The old guidance was that CCR, the next time that was observed, would write that up as a violation for not following the approved plan because it was not shown on the approved plan. The new guidance for that is that we give a 7-day grace period for them to be able to get the ESL to revise that plan and fit that in. The last thing I wanted to do is be punitive to somebody trying to stop an ENS issue ahead of time. So we gave them 7-day grace period, again, to get their plan modified. Another example is guidance for BMP removal. So you heard me talk about that before ESL approval is needed for that removal of any BMP. It used to be, former guidance was that if you were asked permission to remove a BMP following our instructions, that the very next time out the CCR witnessed that if that BMP was still there, it was a violation because it now violated the approved plan and the ESL's red line. What we're doing now is giving 14 calendar days or 10 working days for the contractor to be able to remove that BMP. And at the end of that, if it's still there, it's now not a you didn't follow your plan violation. It just goes in under the construction waste, and which is kind of a downgraded violation compared to you're not following your plan. So with little things like that, the other thing is allowing some DENREC specifications. So this has been allowed for dewatering specification. We also allowed smaller CFLs or compost filter logs to be used so that every compost filter log did not have to be 18 inches on a DelDOT project. We still always want you to use the DelDOT specification if it works. It is much easier that way for billing and for multiple other reasons. But if the need arises to use more, you can get approval by going through the ESL, the stormwater section approval. All right, so communication is key. Just about every topic or problem that I discussed today can be solved through simple communication. That is an actual utility line in the city of Wilmington, by the way, that I saw while doing inspections there. That is not a picture from India or somewhere else. Common sense will not always prevail, but we can try. And what that means is I'm always held by those minimum federal and state standards. But if you think you have a solution to a problem or a reoccurring problem, reach out to me. My contact information is there. I'd rather deal with these issues ahead of time rather than after things blow up and it falls on the desk and we need a solution now. And that is it, unless you have any questions.
No, we don't have any questions at this time.
Thank you.
You're off the hook, so reach out to Nate and Tang if you have any questions following up. Thank you, guys. So now I'm going to invite Billy Sweeney back up along with Mark Buckaloo to talk a little bit on e-ticketing.
Good morning, everyone. I have to say I'm a little shocked. Construction generally doesn't have the last word on things. We'll make sure of that usually, but today we got to be the last presentation. I recognize that I did this presentation for the winter workshop, so here do it again, here were lessons learned, so I changed up all the slides. And I'm gonna try and change up exactly what I said, so that way you have a little more information and you're not hearing the same presentation twice. The department is in the process of getting into a contract with Haul Hub. They have a program called DOT Slip, which is an e-ticketing platform. I'm sorry, I'm Mark Buckaloo. Billy Sweeney is going to be talking about Unifier right after me. So DOT Slip is the platform or the program that we are in the process of trying to create our workflow for the department. So e-ticketing is an FHWA ED6 initiative. The true definition of e-ticketing is a paperless process for tracking, documenting, and archiving material tickets accessible in real time via mobile devices. There's all kinds of different types of e-tickets out there. We're going to try and focus on, to me, it's like the big four, which is hot mix, concrete, aggregate, borrow. Initially, we're going to focus on just hot mix, kind of taking off of what the success Billy's had with Unifier. Is let's start small and expand our capability from there. I've read a lot of papers on e-ticketing. It's very broad. There's some great capabilities, but if we try and go out there with a real broad scope and capture every capability available, I think we're destined to fail. And that's kind of why we want to start with just going with hot mix and get that nailed down. Some potential later additions, once we get the big four locked down, is we could, add rebar, pipe, drainage inlets, guardrail, signs. There's all kinds of different supplies or materials that come into construction projects that we could include in e-tickets as time goes on. Some of the benefits of e-ticketing is enhanced project delivery. Again, capabilities really abound with e-ticketing. Integration with Unifier, that was really key. That's going to be our archiving for electronic ticketing. Quality of information. Of course, it's much easier to see these electronic tickets than it is to read those paper tickets that you receive. Archiving tickets in a digital format. Again, e-ticketing, you can archive in this Haul Hub DOT Slip program, but we're probably going to push everything into Unifier, and that's going to be our archiving mechanism. Improves accessibility to project data. You can literally anywhere, anytime go in through the app, whether on your mobile device or your PC, and see where you are material-wise on a project. Time savings. So how many times have you, had a hot mix activity go off, and you're collecting all these hot mix tickets, and you're missing one at the end of the day? And it's sitting in the back pocket of a foreman, and it goes through the wash. And, tracking down these tickets at the end is always, a struggle. So this allows all the electronic tickets to go in one location. It's easier to find them. You and the contractor can be comparing apples to apples. Improvement to safety. When with a lot of vehicles going on, vehicles on the roadways as you're trying to pave, a lot of times you have to go around, receive the ticket from the truck driver or the contractor. This eliminates all of that. Of course, with COVID, it's less human interaction. What that allows, is COVID going to be around forever? No, but it does reduce that human interaction to kind of take away from possibly affecting one another. I know we had a lot of struggles this year. What are we going to do with tickets? Pennsylvania, I believe, tried to go completely e-ticketing, and they weren't really set up for it. But I want to make sure that we're set up for it and we have a process in place that everybody can work with. E-ticketing process checklist. Just want to kind of go over where we are and where we're going with this. First off, the legal and DTI really needs to sign off on any contracts we have with any outside entities. So we've enlisted, we've worked with legal and DTI with the contract with Haul Hub to make sure we're comfortable with everything. We really almost rewrote the entire contract with them to make sure that legal and DTI and Haul Hub are on the same page. So we have to agree to the terms of use and conditions, agree with the Delaware Cloud Services terms and conditions, because again, all this information can be stored in the cloud. Make sure it's compliant with DelDOT record retention guidelines. Material producers and suppliers. They're our partners in this. We're not building any of these projects by ourselves. We work with contractors, we work with suppliers, we work with the consulting industry. So one of our things we wanted to make sure we did was to make sure that the material suppliers are on the same page. They're really, especially on the hot mix side, they're really pushing that we go with the complete electronic tickets. And that's really helped us push this forward with the department. We met with Delaware Asphalt Producers Association, every single member to make sure we address their concerns. 11, I believe there's 12 hot mix plants, but 11 of the 12 are currently running some sort of e-ticketing platform for themselves. There's one that doesn't really have any e-ticketing platform, and we're going to work with that one contractor to make sure they can get a program up and running where they can get online with the tickets. Develop an integration program to convert supplier tickets data. Haul Hub uses a program called DelBoomi. I don't know anything about it, but what this program does is it basically converts the language from the supplier, whether they're running e-tickets or just a straight online program creating the ticket, that it'll translate into our centralized hub, which I'll get to, transfer that information so that way that when the tickets come in, they're all the same, that they're not all like different types of electronic tickets. Of course, we'll have to run a pilot. Once we get this thing up and running, we'll run a pilot on a couple projects before we roll it out really statewide. Our goal is to run paper tickets at the same time we run electronic tickets, so there's some redundancy to make sure that we don't miss anything on the electronic ticket side, that none of the tickets fall through the hoop somewhere. Of course, DelDOT departmental integration, have to make sure we're all rowing in the same direction. We have many different sections here, and if we go electronic tickets and suppliers are only supplying electronic tickets, it's going to affect materials and research. It's going to affect maintenance. It's going to affect some of the public works jobs that we do. So really, the department as a whole is going to be looking to adopt this. Of course, we're going to have to train staff and consultants on the new process. I don't expect this to take very long, but again, it links in with Unifier. So if you're really up to date on Unifier, and it'll help you really get up to date on the e-ticketing process. And of course, finally, we'll have to update our standard specifications once we, if we ever get to the point where we're going to eliminate paper tickets as a whole. So the e-ticketing workflow. So each supplier, again, produces their own tickets through the DelBoomi software. Each supplier, when they submit it, it'll go into this centralized hub, which is the DelDOT slip. Haul Hub's going to create this platform for us. Their program is called DOT slip. So I think we may have to come up with a slightly different, better term than DelDOT slip. It's a little long for me. And of course, the icon's going to change. That's their icon. We'll have to create our own DelDOT icon. Now, once it's in that centralized hub, so I'll get into it, but it depends on what your job title is and what your responsibilities are. You're going to have different menu views inside that hub. And once it's there, there'll be an opportunity for us to push that information over to Unifier. Again, that's going to be the central filing of the tickets is in Unifier. They're still going to be available in the hub, but once the project ends, our goal is to kind of have a push button available to where we're going to delete it in the DelDOT slip, and all the information will be in Unifier. And has a lot more to do with our archiving and our retention policy. So what I showed you before during the winter workshop was the cell phone view of what the ticket looks like. If you're to go on using your PC, this is what the screen would look like. You have your contract number and project name. If you're an area engineer, you're going to have all your projects will be listed. If you're an inspector, you're only working on one project, you'll probably only see that one project. If you're working in materials and research and you're inspecting different hot mix labs, or hot mix plants, you'll end up having, see maybe a slightly different view there. Of course, you have item number and description of all the materials that were delivered. There's a ticket access and staff information icon that you can click that, and you can see everyone who has access to the tickets. Now, Billy's gonna have God mode, so he's gonna be able to go in and add more people or delete you off. And it's not really any more complicated to say, hey, Billy, I need these people to have access to this. I'm not sure Billy was gonna want to keep that, but Billy likes having God mode too. So Billy's gonna have a lot to say in this. He's been really an asset to help us develop this. And of course, the daily ticket tonnages. Now, once you click on one of the projects, you click on one of the tickets, you can see, again, you can see when the load was put into the truck at the plant, and you can see when the load was delivered to the project. There's going to be inspector tabs, as you can see up at the top, where you can click for mark as delivered or rejected a load. You see at the bottom, there's fillable forms. So the plant inspector can fill in the temperature at the hot mix plant for running hot mix. We just talked about hot mix here. If the inspector in the field, if he takes a temperature of the load as it hits the field, they can take the temperature and fill out the form in that electronic ticket of what the field temperature is. Of course, there's a waste icon. If you want to use half the load, you can document it there. And notes. So the hot mix plant inspectors, they inspect the load. They can put their little notes in there. I know we currently run a stamp on the tickets, hot mix tickets now, but this will help. Instead of putting a stamp on the ticket, you can kind of put your own field notes in there that, hey, this is the first load we tested, whether the test came out well or it didn't come out well, or what the issues were. You can put those in the notes. Of course, the field inspectors can go in as well and put their own field notes in there if they have an issue with the loads or everything's fine. So the timeline for 2021. Again, as tickets evolve, Delaware needs to be on the forefront of this. Across the country, states can't, we're having a hard time making e-tickets work statewide. And I think Delaware, I know we're a small state, but I believe that gives us the ability to pull this off. So these are general timeframes. I'm not putting exact timeframes on here, but for right now, we're going to complete the application development and supplier integration. So that'll be till like April is what my hope is, that we have this thing up and running by April. By mid-April, through May, maybe we can run some pilots with some targeted suppliers, some targeted projects. Once we start running some of these pilots, we'll roll ticketing out statewide, start to use it on all of our projects sometime in the summer. Once we roll those out to all the projects and that hot mix workflow sustainable and everything's working properly, we'll go ahead and start expanding that capability into concrete, bar, open stone. That may take a little bit longer. Again, we're going to have to meet with those suppliers as well and make sure that they have the computer programs that can link into the DelDOT slip. And then finally, sometime towards the end of 2021, maybe beginning of 2022, again, we're not putting a hard date on this. We'll go ahead and do away with paper tickets and go completely 100% electronic tickets. Again, I'm not putting hard timelines on this. We have to be flexible, make sure that suppliers are comfortable, contractors are comfortable, consulting community, our DelDOT inspection staff, all our support sections, make sure we're all on the same page here. With that, I hand over to Billy, and he's going to go ahead and talk more about Unifier.
Thanks, Mark. Just real quick on the e-ticketing thing. I don't know if I said this last time, but I was involved, with e-ticketing when we tried to do it, a few years ago on a couple of, or another project as a pilot with a different company. And, I was kind of excited about it then. And it unfortunately just went away. It didn't quite happen the way we wanted it to, but I'm just excited about what we're doing here with Haul Hub. It's a big step in the right direction for the department. I think, like Mark said, being a small state, there really isn't a reason why we haven't implemented this beforehand. We have, I think, great suppliers, providers, or producers that are that want to work with us on this. They want to be there with us to get to the end result of going paperless with these material tickets. So, I think it's a good thing, and the fact that we're gonna just let those tickets come right into Unifier so that they're all in with all the other documentation that we're creating from a Unifier standpoint, which I'll talk a little bit about here in the next few slides. I think it's going to create a spot where you can go one place and find everything you need from a construction documentation. I think that's a major benefit to how we are, what we're trying to do from an e-construction initiative as a whole. So a lot of all the slides you're going to see are pretty much exactly what I did at the winter workshop. I'll go into a tad bit more detail, but not a lot. Like I was saying, at the winter workshop, we have 250 projects. I think we're probably at 260 projects now. Right around 450 users that are both in-house state of Delaware employees, consultants, and contractors. There's a couple of FHWA users as well, so we're, again, slowly expanding our user base. We recently purchased additional licenses, another 250 licenses as part of our P6 migration, so I won't talk a whole lot about that today, but a lot of that being trying to move our P6 functionality into Unifier and consolidating down into one application, which again, I think is going to lead into our improving our e-construction initiative, which is trying to make sure that we're gathering the documentation throughout our design phase of projects, the planning or kind of the development phase of projects, and making that documentation available to construction. Those documents that we deem necessary for that. So we're up to, I think we own 700 licenses now at this point of Unifier. We started inspector daily reports in April 2017. I don't think we've quite crossed the 100,000 record mark on IDRs. We're really close. It's probably, when I checked it a couple of days ago, I think we were just under 98,000 records that we've recorded. So again, like I said, then when workshop it, when you're thinking of IDRs that could be 2-3 pages long at sometimes, you multiply that 98,000 by 2, and you can see how many reams of paper we've saved, and not had to store in a hard file because they're electronically stored. We've done 1,300 price approval records since July of 2017, and that price approval business process actually creates the letter for the construction team and can transmit it directly to the contractor. So now there's no need to start a Word file, create the table in the Word file, save it as a PDF, email it out to the contractor and the 14 different people that need to get it from a CC standpoint. We can handle the majority of that in Unifier. And again, attempting to kind of make things a little more efficient, save some paper and time. Change orders, again, we started in May of 2019. As of the time of this presentation, we had done 830 change orders, and it was right around $56 million. That is, that includes both negative and positive change orders, so it's not a total positive increase of $56 million. It's just the total, of all of them. Estimates, started these in May of 2019 as well. I think we've reached, I don't think we've hit the 700 record mark yet, but again, we're pretty close since I created this slide. And we've paid around $286 million out in estimates directly through Unifier. To date, we've got a number of processes that are in place, both main business processes and support processes. So those are, like I've showed here, things like IDRs, change orders, pencil and progress estimates, RFIs, submittals. Those types of processes are what we consider our main processes. And then we have to have processes or what we call BPs, business processes, to support those. So for things like change orders, we have a process that maintains or holds all of our change order reason codes, so that if for any reason we ever want to modify that list of change order reason codes, we don't have to completely redesign the entire business process in order to add these additional reason codes in. We can just go right into the change order reason code support business process. Anybody that has the right access can add reason codes or remove reason codes or deactivate them if you need to. So just kind of an example, contacts vendors both at the company level or a master roster vendors and project level for just those contractors, subcontractors that are assigned to the projects at just the project level. Same thing with pay items. Again, all things we consider support because they're used as a way to interact with a main business process of some sort, whether you're using an IDR and you're having to select pay items or having to select which vendors are on site on that day, which contractors, subcontractors are on site on that day. Again, all support BPs that are out there. And it comes up to 26 total business processes that we've put into place, and we're obviously constantly adding additional ones all the time. From the design phase side, we've are either in the process of developing or we have developed and pushed to production some additional business processes. These are the ones right now that we have coming up real soon. So a BMP stormwater facility ID request form. This is kind of a replacement to that PDF form that's out there right now. We're working with the folks that are responsible for that process to get that electronically in Unifier. Environmental permit requests. This is for the M&O side, replacing the Maximo functionality, putting it in Unifier and making that available to them at the request of the environmental section. Project funding increase request. So this is that Excel form that is out there that we're using right now that has to get emailed around. We've been working on this for a little while, and it's getting really close to being ready. Just have a few kind of outlying things that we have to get answers on, related to some of the different thresholds. With the idea that a lot of this was geared mainly towards probably construction and that phase, but now that we're going to be bringing in the P6 functionality and that phase of our projects is going to be in Unifier, obviously. We will want any project that has capital funding that needs to increase their funding on the project would run this process through and would have an identified workflow and, ideally would take out that need to then email that file around. Obviously going to add a lot of transparency for where it's at in the process. Track if there's issues that we need additional information or whatever, track that revision process. We can kind of really pinpoint our training on how to do those specific processes. In the construction phase, some stuff we've got coming up. The construction NTP, first chargeable day. First chargeable day. This is suspension and resumption. Subcontract group, I'm not going to read them, but those are the ones that we have coming up here real soon that we're going to begin working on. I think the next one that we're probably going to see is the time suspension and resumption and the force account. I think are the two that we're going to push. Subcontractor approval, we've been talking about it for a while, and we'll get that out as well. And then, like I said, at the last workshop, some other interest that we have in Unifier, I seem to get emails from folks all the time that are just, hey, give me a Unifier. How can we use it? I've seen the different stuff you've done at workshops, and you talk about it all the time. And what can we do? So, working with Tom Nickel in the ADA group of civil rights with tracking some of his processes that he's doing that are email heavy or maybe form heavy. The DBE group, they're in Unifier right now, using it from an information standpoint. Obviously, if we can provide some sort of functionality to that group that allows them to track their processes and provide them the information easier to get, obviously that's important. The audit group, we've talked to them off and on about I'll call it non-construction NTP. So actually requesting a notice to proceed on things, like agreements for consultant agreements and that kind of stuff. And again, as we're moving into the design phase and bringing the P6 functionality in, that's going to allow us to use this tool for some of that stuff. We previously had discussions with Right Away about using Unifier to replace the REM tool. I'm hoping to get back in discussions with them at some point as well. Talking with the materials section on bringing in some of their processes, some of their notifications that they send out through testing results and stuff like that. Bringing them in, obviously, I think is important as well. And then, the P6 migration piece that, that I talked briefly about, just the, this idea of consolidating our P6 functionality, that design phase of our projects into unifier, and adding some transparency into some of those processes that we have, and maybe hopefully guiding folks through the process, P&R process, that kind of thing that is out there. I think that's it.
Right. Thank you very much, Billy and Mark. There's no questions at this time, but if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to them on the e-ticketing or unifier. Lastly, I'd like to invite Jim Pappas up to make a few closing remarks and recognize a few individuals for their commitment to some of the areas we talked about over the last few days.
Thank you, John, very much. So those are your visual aids. So I asked Bob to do that because I wanted to believe, did they really have that sign? Because those of you out in Cyberland, you hear that, oh, Bob's holding a sign up that says 5 more minutes. Well, just wanted to prove that, yes, in fact, he does. I do believe we do have a presentation for this part. Oh, yeah, it's not up on this screen, it's on that screen. Okay, first of all, before we get into this, I want to thank all of the folks that presented over the last day and a half, or last 2 days, kind of 2 half days. To John, to Bob, Danny, Todd, thank you all very much for making this a successful event in the challenging situation that we're in, but you guys did a fantastic job. So thank everybody for all of their in that. So the smart people in the room came up with the idea of some type of a recognition award for people across the department. As you've heard this morning, the engineering support team spends a lot of time discussing things that are, obviously very important across the department. ENS and ADA obviously are 2 of the major critical things that that are of great importance for the department. And there's a lot of time, resources spent in doing that. So there were some categories that were thought of ways that we could potentially, address some of the great things that are done. So feel like the Academy Awards or something like that. So the 3 categories will be erosion and sediment, ADA implementations, and overall construction management. So these are 3 things that, again, the engineering support team are involved in very closely, whether it be design, construction, and ultimately acceptance by the department. So the erosion and sediment finalists were Sarah Powell from Group 3 Construction, Jay Evans from Group 3 Construction, and Raj Singha from Group 3 Construction. Sensing a theme here with Group 3 Construction. And the winner is, do we have a drum roll? Sarah Powell from Group 3 Construction. So Sarah, if you're out there in Cyberland, there's a gift bag that will be coming to you. Within that gift bag, and you will be getting a certificate of appreciation from the department, thanking you for your efforts. If I were more organized, I'd have had this in order, but so this is what you will be getting. And there's a large sum of money in here as well. So that's the most important part. All right. The next category is for ADA implementation finalists. So the nominees were Richard Larkin from South Public Works, Chris Webb from Group 3 Construction, and Melissa Feldman from Canal District CTF program. And the winner is, Melissa Feldman from Canal District. So if you're out there, Melissa, congratulations. Your gift bag and large amount of cash will be coming to you in the very near future. And our last group was construction management. So our finalists were Mike Beulah from the Pavement Management Program, Brian Locke from Group 1 Construction, and Jay Evans from Group 3 Construction. And the winner is Mr. Jay Evans from Group 3 Construction. So Mr. Evans is here, so we will say thank you very much for all of your efforts. So this was, again, I think this was the first year we did this, and something that we're going to do. Everybody does a great job across the department. With all the challenges we have and construction, you know, Mark, you get beat up a lot. A lot of it is expected, but as the expression goes, of much is given, much is expected. So department as a whole, everybody does a fantastic job. We just, you know, this was the first year. I think it was a great idea. So I don't know who within engineering support came up with it, but it was a great idea. Maybe we expand it in the future, things like that. But if you weren't a winner, if you weren't on there, that doesn't mean you're doing a bad job. Everybody across the department is doing everything they can. So just want to thank everybody for that. So I think this is the end. So again, great job to everybody who was involved. Thank you for all the support. Presenters, you did a great job. Hopefully, if nothing else, some of the things spurred some conversations so that, you know, if you're out there and you heard something from one of the presenters, you know, feel free to reach out to them. I'm sure they'd be happy to talk in greater detail about anything that they did. So with that, I would say continue to be safe, be well. We're looking forward to the day that we can do this face-to-face. But again, thanks to Todd and his team for making this seamless from the electronic world. So with that, have a great afternoon and take care.
Appreciate it.